life dedicated to a craft, that's a good life. It's a little different than what most people view it to be. But
Yeah.
if you find something and you can really like hone your skills at it when you're younger, you can do it. When you're older, you can teach it. That's something about like lifting in general as a discipline is like that peak age being a little bit later. Like if you're not making it in football by the time you're 23, you're kind of out of ever being really at the highest level. Whereas like
Yep.
you can peak in bodybuilding and you can peak in strength sports mid to late 30s. So it's like I've still got a decade to put in work before I could reach my career peak. So that idea that like, man, I'm rewarded if I stick with this for a really long time to like a greater degree than most sports definitely is like a big one for me.
Not only are you taking it at a high level, and there's still way more for you to unlock, but you're also teaching it. So you got the best of both.
I've got my foot in that door really early because like, I was coaching people back when I like in high school. Like you know how it is. Like you're like me. You're a guy who's weirdly interested in training. You start like your friends who are like a little bit more casually into it. You start helping them with their programs because you're like, well, I'm spending all day on the internet learning stuff about this. Like let me help you out. And then by the time I was in college, like yeah, I was already like full blown like coaching.
Right. So tell me about that. How did your journey begin? Because you start at a young age, and I feel like those who are doing that, say between 12 and 15 years old now, have a crazy advantage over those who started lifting at like 18 beyond. Because let's say you started training at 15, at 25 years old, you already got 10 years under your belt. Thing is, time is what matters most in this game. And like you said, you're going to peak later in life, not even in your 20s.
Yeah, assuming you're doing things right? Because some guys get in the gym really early, but it's like they're not exactly putting in structured training. So it's like you're getting some physiological adaptation, you're getting some heads up. But the guys who have like the true head start are the guys who get into like focused training towards a goal early. It's a huge head start. I started when I was 15. I'm 25 now. And like you said, I'm 10 years into my training career.
There you go.
My little brother started when he was like 11, right?
Wow.
So it's like even
and you coach
bigger,
him, right?
Yeah. And so it's like, and he started like when he started training, it was like dedicated, intelligent training because I was writing it for him, right?
Yep.
So he had the specific goal of powerlifting. And people were always confused. Hey, how is this kid 16 and this strong? Like this must be a drugs thing. What the hell? Like I'm 20 something and I'm not this strong. And it's like, well, Max has 6 years of highly focused. By the age of 16, he was 6 years into like focused training. It helps that he's a very large person because people also don't really scale their expectations, right? It's like if you are a guy who's like 5'5", right? You are working with like a fundamentally different numerical progression than some guy who's like 6'3", right?
Yep.
What is a good like that's why weight classes exist. You could be the better power lifter, but a lot of the time when people are looking at gym lifts, they're not really accounting for bodily size. So they're like, oh, how is this 18-year-old kid squatting 700? It's like, well, that 18-year-old kid weighs 350 pounds. That's a double body weight squat, right?
Weight classes are essentially height classes in disguise.
Yeah.
So when you have the massive frame and the height to go with it, like your absolute strength potential is higher. Sure, your relative strength might not be there, but with what you see with your brother, textbook example.
Now he's 10 years in and he's a 20-year-old and he's pulling 800 in competition, squatting like 770. But it's like that is a decade of focused training. And also the big advantage of just being a big person, right? Like I've done enough coaching. You can see that like the road to a 315 bench press for just a big guy, maybe a guy who played football, is a very different looking endeavor than someone who's like skinny. Maybe they didn't play too many sports in high school and they start lifting at like 150 pounds. They bulk up to 170. That road to 315 is a real undertaking. Whereas that big dude that played football, he's got that background of athletic history. That's like a casual undertaking. He's like, oh, in a couple of months, hopefully I can do it. I'm like, well, shit, you might be able to. You're a big guy. Like it's definitely a different ballpark.
Yeah, well, what I've seen is with the best naturals, most of them have gained significant amounts of weight to get very strong. And I personally know someone who's been training for around 10 years. He was benching around 225 at the start. Now he finally hit 405. And I would say his genetics are very average, but he also weighs 260 pounds at about 5'9" in height. So if people aren't willing to do that, then it explains why their progression is so slow, or it's not scaling the way that they think it will.
Yeah, like you have to. It's like if you look at like competitive powerlifting, because I get that a lot of people like in our community aren't interested in competitive powerlifting, and more power to you. Lifting can be. That's part of the coolest parts about lifting is it can be whatever you want it to be. Whatever you want to be your measure of leg strength, it can. Now, if you want to be competitive, obviously you've got a couple of options, but powerlifting is something that we like, whether we think it's cool and we participate in. Like, I compete in strongman. I don't compete in powerlifting. My brother does powerlifting. More power to him. But I think that like we would be foolish not to learn from like a developed strength sport, even if our goal is like, I don't give a shit about bench press, I do overhead press. Even if I don't care about squat, I do front squats. Whatever it is, there's a lot we can learn from that. And it's like that same thing of like the weight class you start into is more or less almost, unless you started like overweight, and then it might be that your body composition changes a good bit and you might be staying in the same weight class. But if you started at like a normal healthy weight, your optimal competitive weight class is never the weight class you started in. It's always heavier than you think too, because it's like, I'm sure you can relate. When you first got into lifting, and I first got into lifting, I thought I would be massive at 180. I was like, that sounds because I started when I was like 145. I was boxing. I wanted to go up a weight class because I was a gym hero, and we didn't really stick to weight classes for sparring. And I kept getting beat up by guys that weighed about 170. So I was like, I'll spar with the same guys. So what I started doing is I would run in the morning, I would go to school, I would go to boxing, and after boxing, I would go hit the gym to lift some weights, because that was what I would told. Like, I'm like, that's how you go up weight class. So I started going up weight class, and I imagined, I was like, I'm going to look like Mike Tyson if I weigh 180. And then I got to 180, and I was like more and more into lifting because I could see this long career peak. And like, I'm just into physical training, like I was 10 and I went to boxing and I was sore as shit. And I was like, I felt terrible. And I was like, this is awesome. This is what I'm going to spend my life doing. I just love physical training, whatever it is. But then I got into weights, and I was like, this is like super concrete physical training with numbers. This is awesome. I look different because I got better at it. This is all cool. But I was like 145 and climbing. And then I felt skinny at 185. And then I got to 205. And I was like, okay, started to feel a little bit. And then I got to 225. But like when you're early on, you can't even imagine being as heavy as you get. And knowing, man, I could be even better if I pushed up a little bit more. So it's like you said, like, especially with natural athletes, when you don't have that crutch of PEDs to like drive some like neural adaptation, because it's like, people don't like to talk about it, but all of the untested powerlifters and all the untested strongmen are pushing a bunch of things at the last minute that basically are ramping up their central nervous system, allowing them to express more strength than what they've actually built through training. When you don't have that, you really do need to optimize things and to probably get into the right weight range to be able to lift the most weights you can lift. Now, whether like genetically your propensity is to be a top of the world guy or still just pretty damn strong, because I think the average person can get tremendously strong, like you still need to get to those optimal weightlifting leverages, and it's heavier than you think, and it's going to take longer than you think, but people can't imagine those really long-term changes very well.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. I totally agree. Like in my experience, I started off at 120 pounds, and after a couple of years of doing straight calisthenics, I was 143, still ripped up, started lifting, got up to around 167, and then bulked again to around the bear mode range in the 180s. That's where most of my muscle came from. But then last year, I got up to 200 pounds. Now, if you would have told that 120-pound kid, like, you're going to weigh 200 one day at 5'5", I'd be like, what? What are you smoking? But that's the precise weight range that I needed to hit in order to unlock my strength. And the leverage thing is very real. I think that's the major benefit, to be honest, and the fact that you can recover better. So it's like you talked earlier about, if someone didn't peak at like an early age, I would say there's 3 cards. One is how early you started. Secondly is how fat you're willing to get. And the third thing is PEDs. But that's the last thing that you pull. And most of the time you don't need to if you're willing to put on weight. And a lot of guys who think they hit their so-called limit is because they're trying to be shredded year round or be overly lean. And if they were to push it up to say 15, 20% body fat, or even beyond that point, they'd realize very quickly that there's so much more they can do.
Yeah, and well, that's the thing that's like, it's weird, right? Because hand up in the air. I'm not natural, right? But I coach a hell of a lot of natural athletes. My brother was actually the youngest person at the time to ever deadlift 800 in competition, 100% natural, right? And it's like, but I'm not part of that camp anymore. So shockingly, I was born part of that camp. I trained as part of that camp, right? But it's like this discussion gets really muddied because, like you said, people can't imagine themselves being that much heavier, right? And so they see someone make that kind of change and they assume it must be drugs because it's hard for us to process that stark of a change in the same person. And also when we talk about like these limitations, like you said, some guy will be like, man, I've hit this hard limit. And it's like, if I could come up with several things you could do to pass that limit, it wasn't really a true like physiological limit.
Exactly.
It was a limit to how dedicated you are. Like, so it's like, if I told you hypothetically, this is your full-time job, you're going to eat 5 square meals a day of clean food, really good micronutrient density. You're not just hitting your macros, but you're hitting your macros using foods that have like a wide array of micronutrients. So our body has a lot of like basically just building blocks to work with, a lot of tools to work with to adapt to the training. And I said, you're going to sleep 10 hours a night and you're just going to train like an animal. You would crush past that limit, right? So it wasn't a natural limit. It was a limit to how good your outside the gym variables were. Or if I said you're going to bulk up 30 pounds, you'll scoot right past that limit, right? So it's like a lot of the limits are, okay, well, we've kind of reached the limit for our level of process. Because this is something over on my channel I talk about all the time is I don't like defining beginner, intermediate, advanced based on like your rate of progression. Because sometimes there's a guy whose progress has slowed to a halt at a very, very low level, but it's because he's binge drinking every weekend. He skips meals every single day. He's just way too skinny. He's not in the right weight class. He doesn't sleep enough. So it's like, well, his progression has halted. That doesn't make him advanced. It makes his level of process is bad. And that's why he's halted. Or we could reverse that and we could have a late stage intermediate or an advanced guy that's still progressing well. But if we look at why he's progressing well, it's because he is really neurotic with his diet. He's getting enough sleep. He's taking his step count per day. His technique is locked in on all of the lifts he's focusing on, and he trains really hard. And so it's like that guy, he is still progressing, you can't tell him he's less advanced than that guy who stalled because of errors, right? So instead of thinking about, oh, well, my progress stopped on 5x5, that means I'm intermediate now. Well, your progress on 5x5 might continue if your diet was better, your sleep was better, your effort on your accessories was better, right? So when I like try to think of my athletes or people who are coming to me for help or myself, and we're trying to think like beginner, intermediate, advanced, it's more a matter of like, hey, can you be really honest with me? What does your nutrition look like? What does your sleep look like? What does your training, like send me your videos. How hard are you working on your accessories? Is your training smart? And the kind of amalgam of all of these things, beginner, intermediate, advanced kind of becomes like a rating of their overall process, right? And some people really are delusional with themselves. And it's like, that's why you're stuck, is because you can't look yourself in the mirror and say like, you're like, no, I'm pretty good with my diet. I shouldn't need to be good with my diet to get past a 225 bench press. Whether you think you should do something like, I shouldn't have to do this, that doesn't matter. If you have to do it, you have to do it. And if you need to dial in your nutrition to get past a 2-plate bench press, you either do it or you don't. Either give up or do it. And so it's like, that's kind of one of the big things that I like to look at, like when we're looking at like when someone is progressing and when they aren't, is like, let's look outside the gym. Do genetics matter? For sure. Like I'm not an idiot, and I'm not going to be that guy with good genetics. Like clearly, my brother's very strong. I'm very strong. I saw success in the gym relatively quickly, right? Like I wouldn't be like my best deadlift is 835 right now, and my best bench press is 565. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't in some upper percentile of genetics. But that being said, I do think that we still need to be very honest with our rating of process. And because we can't control our genetics, we may as well put that out of our mind a little bit and dedicate those mental faculties to all the things within our control.
Wow, this is insane, man. So on your channel, you talk a lot about how most lifters are probably intermediate lifters instead of being advanced. And once they start doing things properly again, like fast progress quickly returns. So what I would ask you is, how do you determine if someone is really a novice? How long can this process be milked for?
Definitionally, I think, especially like if we go on YouTube, and this isn't an insult to anyone, right? Like I was a beginner, everybody was a beginner. But there are more beginners than there are intermediates, and there are more intermediates than there are advanced, right? Like people will quit the sport relatively early, and it's the rare person that sticks with it truly, because it's not just showing up to the gym, because we all know some guy at the gym who's like, I've been going here for 15 years, and it's like, wow, you've made no results in 15 years.
Exactly.
That's like, just showing up isn't necessarily enough. You have to be showing up and making a genuine effort to get better year after year. And that's true training time, right?
Yeah, time alone is not being advanced, you know?
Exactly. And it's the rare kind of person, like I said, you're like me, we're weirdos, right? Like we're guys that really are passionate about lifting weights and physical training. And it's like, we're a little bit rare to make it 8-10 years into really focused training. But just definitionally, there's more people that are kind of casually putting their foot into it to see if they like lifting. And then there's more people that then there's a little bit less number of people who have been like, okay, I'm taking this pretty seriously, but like, I'm not dedicating my life to it. You know, I'm not bending my day around facilitating good progress in the gym. But as far as like determining where someone's at, I almost like to get the athlete away from the label. I just don't think it's practical because it's like good programming is good programming, right? Good exercise selection is good exercise selection. Because we arbitrarily shifted from like late stage beginner into early stage intermediate, that lifter is still a very similar lifter, right? So that the changes that we might make to the program aren't massive. The numbers are just going to keep going up, right? And as we need to, we observe, hey, this musculature seems to be lagging behind a little bit. Hey, your hinge pattern, your deadlift seems to be a little bit underdeveloped. Maybe we need to include, like, there's going to be like small changes, but there's not these big shifts in our programming, whether like it's an athlete I'm coaching or an athlete that's self-taught through YouTube, because that's where I learned most of what I know, through YouTube and podcasts. You know, like I've got a bachelor's in exercise physiology, and I can't say I call upon it very often. Most of what I've learned, practically speaking, has been here on YouTube, right? So it's like if you're someone who's self-taught, it's not like there's this big moment where you're like, ah, shit, I hit intermediate. I need to pick a totally different program. So what I do is I try to get people away from those labels. And just think about like, hey, let's just stay in our own little world. Let's not compare ourselves to other people, right? Like, let's just look at our own stuff, because I can tell you just from like, I've worked with a lot of really strong guys. I'm very proud of that. Like probably more proud than my own lifts to a certain degree. Like I think I've coached like 20 some people to a 405 bench press, and I've got 4 800 deadlifters right now. I'm very proud of these things. And it's been good because I can make observations that aren't just me being a douchey high-level lifter who's like, this is what works for me. You need to squat every other week. And it's like, okay, dude, that squats 1,000. I understand you need to squat every other week, but that doesn't mean the guy trying to go from 300 to 350 should do that. So I've got like a little bit of extra perspective, because I can look at which athletes like continued to progress smoothly through those middle phases to the upper phases, and what like mentalities and what habits they had. And the biggest one that I observe is every single one of my good lifters is kind of in their own world. You know, they're not really paying attention to what other people are lifting. It's almost narcissistic. They're just like thinking about like, as soon as they finish their session, all they can think about is like, oh man, I got deadlifts on Thursday. I got to get ready. Got to go to bed early. Got to eat my meals. I got a big deadlift session. I want to hit this. Like, they set goals ahead of the sessions, and they're just kind of go in their own world. They're doing like, oh man, I really want this deadlift number tomorrow. I'm going to do my mobility. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And so they've got this kind of just never ending, like, focus on just the next training session, or like what's later this week. They're not looking super far ahead, and they're not looking like at other people saying, man, it sucks that this other, like, because a lot of them they're high level lifters, but high level lifters fall into the same plights that lower level lifters do. You're going to compare yourself to other people on the internet. I can go on Instagram and I can find people that make me feel bad about my bench press. My bench press is my best lift. It's a pretty good lift, but I can still be like, God damn, there's a guy who's been training for only 4 years who's beating me. But it's like, that doesn't do anything for me. All I can do is keep my head down and look at, like, I log everything in a notebook. I log my food, my water, my supplements, my training, my cardio, my mobility. It all goes in a notebook every single day. And I've got notebooks that span back like the last 8 years of training. I just look at my notebook and I say, well, what can I do better? Because it's like, if every page of my notebook looks like a super high level, like what I imagine a high level lifter would do. I imagine they would eat a lot of clean food. I imagine they would go to bed early. I imagine they would do their like training. They would do their cardio. They would do a bit of mobility. Everything I imagine a high level like athlete would do. If my notebook looks like that day after day after day, even if I'm not right now, I will become what I'm doing every single day. And the notebook kind of gives me that. So it's like all of my good athletes, instead of thinking like, you're an intermediate, you're like, I just say, let's all look at our notebooks, whether that's metaphorical or physical, and not pay attention to that, and just find like, well, what can we do a little bit better next week? Did I drop the ball on my nutrition this week? Maybe. Did I drop the ball on my sleep? Maybe.
Right.
And just because like some people, different things are of different importance, right? It's like my food is everything. If I eat like really, really dialed in, my training follows suit. Whereas my brother's the exact opposite. His food can be still very good, but he can like miss a meal and nothing bad happens. But if he misses any sleep, his training goes down the gutter. So like, what's the most important variable for you? Like, let's identify that and try to do better and better and better at that. Right. So I guess that would be my answer, is like, I try not to think about like, how long are you going to be an intermediate? How long? Let's just stay like week to week, not try to look broader view and be looking on the horizon of when we're an intermediate. Let's just focus on getting that 5 extra pounds on the bar. Let's focus on getting our technique a little bit cleaner. Let's focus on getting our diet a little bit more consistent. Maybe we're just at 1 meal a day. That's like truly a good lifter style meal. Let's try to get to 2, you know, like that kind of thing.
It sounds very process oriented. Like basically self-improvement applied to lifting.
Absolutely.
And it's also obsessive narcissism is how I describe it, which might sound bad, but to guys like us, it's like, yeah, this is what it's all about. Now, what I'm curious about is, do you program some of these lifters on the fly? Because everything is in the moment, right? So do things change on a weekly basis where it's all auto-regulated? Like it's not some cookie cutter pre-written thing where you got to follow this exact percentage or whatnot. Like, what is your general approach to programming? Because there's not only with what works for you, but with all these strong guys that you've coached. And that makes a big difference. When you can say that you've brought all these people up to a 405 bench, I mean, there's a lot of weight there.
Basically, when I was getting into lifting, like I was doing a linear like 5x5, and then that started to stall. And I kind of, without knowing any better, I kind of invented like daily undulating, right? Where I was like, okay, well, I've got a linear 5x5 on Monday, and then I've got a linear like 3x10 on Thursday, right? So one day is a little bit more strength emphasis, one day is a little bit more hypertrophy emphasis.
Yeah.
And that kind of let me like stall out how long I continue like just a true linear program. Right. And eventually that came to an end. And that was a big conundrum. And that's a big conundrum that lots of lifters run into. Is that's your first big puzzle, is when I can no longer add weight every week, what do I do from there? Right. And like we've moved to like a rep target system has gotten more popular, like all these different things. Right. But in strength training, that's usually when we start to enter some kind of periodization where every single week is not the exact same. And when I was really early into training, I watched a video about how Ed Cohn trained. And Ed Cohn does traditional American block periodization, where it's like, let's say it's 8 to 12 weeks of training. We begin the training cycle around 60%, and we try to end the training cycle at around 101, right? And that made very logical sense to me. When I was a younger guy, I was just like, okay. So if I can't add weight every single week, all I have to do is on my third week of my program, as long as I'm stronger than the last time I was on that third week, like once I run through 10 weeks, exactly. I've got a reference for all 10 weeks. And by the time I get back to that same week, I need to be a little bit stronger than last time. That makes sense. That sounds like a logical solution to this issue that arises when you train, right? And I was like, okay, I like this idea of like 10-week training cycles. I roughly observed that like athletes start at 60% and finish at 101. And then obviously, like you said, it's not cookie cutter. When you start getting advanced athletes, you can't afford to hand out cookie cutter plans. So you make observations, right? So you're like, man, this guy's pretty good at reps at a given percentage. I think it's a waste of time to have him start down at 60%. He should probably start up towards 70 or 75 because he can take 75% for a bunch of sets of 8. Why would we start at like sets of 15?
Makes a difference there.
Exactly, right? Like a guy with like who's got really favorable leverages for a deadlift might be able to take the same percentage for more reps, or the same thing, guy with shorter arms might be able to take the same percentage for more reps. So we make some tailors there. Or if you've got a guy who's like very fast twitch dominant, very explosive lifter, he might only be able to do 8 reps at like 60% because he burns out so quick. His first rep flies and his maximal strength is great, but his rep endurance is a little questionable. So we might even actually start him down at 55%. But like I had this idea, 10 weeks on average, maybe some athletes I'll move towards 12, maybe I'll move towards 8. But I started out with like this rough idea of like, okay, this athlete's going to run repeated training cycles. And our goal is to end each training cycle a little bit stronger than the last one, right? Because it's like we can kind of pick like every training cycle, I try to end with a 5-pound PR, right? And you kind of expect your rate of progression based on your assessment of your variables. You say, okay, I've only been training for like 2 years. I started taking it really serious recently. My diet's good. My sleep is good. I feel like I'm nowhere near my potential. Realistically, I should be able to add 10 every training cycle. So we run through it. And if we achieve that 10-pound PR, we repeat almost the exact same training cycle again, because what worked last time with updated maxes will likely work again, right? There's probably going to be some quality of life changes where it's like, yeah, maybe we arbitrarily switch out like one tricep motion for another. As long as we're taking the elbow joint through a full range of motion, it's probably going to do about the same thing. As long as we're doing our 5 hard sets at the end of our bench workout, it doesn't matter which. So we can make some quality of life changes, but that fundamental progression is going to stay the same. If we exceed that 10 pounds, we're probably going to do the same thing again with some quality of life changes. And if we fall short of what we kind of deem to be like, I'll communicate with the athlete and we'll kind of get on the same page for what we think is a realistic rate of progression to expect. And if we fall short of that, I have a conversation with them and say, hey, how was your variables? Like, do you think this was the program? Like we missed something? Do you think in the first 4 weeks we were not doing enough or too much? Right? Because you can kind of say in that 60 to 100% progression, 60 to 75 is like a hypertrophy phase. It's just one big program. It all flows together smoothly, but we can slap labels on the beginning, middle, and end. So like 60 to 75 is kind of a hypertrophy phase. 70 to 85 is kind of a strength phase, and 85 to 100 is kind of a peaking phase. So I can say like, okay, looking at it, where do you feel like you lost your momentum? Like we were cruising through the hypertrophy phase, you were hitting total volume PRs left and right. Strength phase, we're hitting some rep PRs. Peaking phase, it kind of fell apart. Do you think it fell apart in the peaking phase, or do you think we lost our momentum in the strength phase and we make adjustments? Or if they're like, Sam, I'm going to be honest with you, I dropped the ball. I was going to bed too late. I just got a new girlfriend. Like we were like I was missing meals, right? Like that kind of thing. I'm like, okay, well, thank you for being honest with me. That means it might not have been the program. We might not make big changes. But if they're like, Sam, I really tried. My outside the gym variables were as good as they've ever been. Then I'm like, okay, we're not going to do the same thing twice. So that's kind of what we do is we set up these 10-week training cycles. That's like customized to the person with the starting percentage, the ending percentage, how many sets per week in each phase, right? Because in the beginning, we're probably going to be training more sets with a little bit more reps in reserve. By the end, we're going real heavy, different exercise selection, blah, blah, blah. And then we basically just make observations. If it succeeded, repeat. If it failed, adjust. And I would say, like, as far as how my programming works, it's pretty simple. When you look at like auto-regulated programs, usually people will give you a sets, a reps, and an RPE. So 3x5 at 8, right? So what you're auto-regulating is the load. I like auto-regulating reps where I'll say, hey, Alex, you have 75% on the bar. I want you to rep that to about RPE 7 4 times, right? And it's not a percent, like it's like people at first, they're like, I don't know when to rack it. And it's just like picking a weight, right? So if I told you to find a weight for a 3x5 at 7, at first you're not going to be great at it, but it's like a skill like anything else. You practice it, and eventually you're like, okay, well, I can roughly estimate it. Sometimes I'm a bit above, sometimes I'm a bit below, but I average at an RPE 7, right?
Right.
It's the same idea as I say, hey, rep 2 RPE 7-ish. It's kind of general. And the higher level the athlete, the more we almost get away from RPE 7 means it has to be 3 reps in reserve. They understand, okay, in the hypertrophy phase, we're not really trying to hit true grinders, and we're not trying to drill reps with breakdown. Our goal in the hypertrophy phase is to accumulate as much total volume of quality reps as possible and not drill really broken down reps, because it's only going to get worse as it gets heavier. If we establish really poor motor patterns, accumulating our volume, I would rather have someone do 4 sets with like 3 reps in the tank on their squat than 2 sets of like 10 where they're going all out. Right?
Okay.
They're probably going to be about the same in terms of driving hypertrophy, but one of those we've practiced pristine technique that like is going to stay good through the rest of the training cycle. And one of those, it's only going to get heavier and it's only going to get worse if we do like all out sets of 8 to 12 to build our volume. But like usually what I'll do is in the first 4 weeks, I'll tell someone to like rep to about RPE 7 to 8 for a certain number of sets. And then we start adding in like top singles in the strength phase, do some back offs. I say rep to about RPE 8 to 9. And then we add in some back offs in the strength phase. So basically that's kind of my system, is it is auto-regulated based on what the athlete needs to do on the day, right? Because it's like, it's tough when you have like high level athletes or even low level athletes, because low level athletes don't have great control of their outside the gym variables. So you'll actually see the advanced athletes are a little bit more predictable in how strong they're going to be, because you know that they're going to nail their sleep and their food. Whereas I'm sure you've seen like lower level guys, they're like, I stayed up till 3 a.m. watching Netflix, coach. And you're like, you had a big deadlift day the next day. What the hell are you doing? Like, we need to auto-regulate. You can't just force weight onto the bar through sheer willpower. But
that's why I prefer training advanced guys. If you give me a novice, like, oh, damn, there's going to be a lot of work here. But someone already has the fundamentals down. You tell them it's this, they're going to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And you can trust that the footage they send is going to be on point.
There's a lot that you have to communicate. You're so deep in, you take it for granted. You're like, of course you go to bed on time. Of course you eat your food before and after. Like, what do you mean you didn't eat before you went to the gym today? What are you talking about? Right? And it's like, you don't even think of these things, because you think like when you're working with advanced athletes and other people who have been around the weight room for a very long time pursuing results, there's all these things that like, I'm not going to tell you like, oh yeah, make sure you eat before training. Of course, Alex knows that. What are you talking about? Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, so you take these things for granted, and then you start working with this lower level athlete, and you're like, you did what? Right? So it's like, you know, it's trades, right? So, and it's like, there's some coaches that are great with working with beginners, and I think those guys are amazing. I don't think I'm any better than them. Grassroots coaches are the best, right? Because they're going to teach all of these out. They're going to teach these foundational things that are going to make that lifter's whole next 10 years smoother. Maybe they like outgrow this coach a little bit and they move on to a coach that works with more advanced athletes, but they're going to see smooth progression because of that coach that works with more beginners. And that coach is specialized in taking from someone who's never done a squat, getting them to a pretty good squat. I'm not great at that. I mostly work with guys who already kind of know how to squat, and we make small adjustments.
Exactly.
I don't teach people how to squat. And those people are doing
instead of working
those people are
doing
God's work. I respect them so much. And it's like they teach them at the outside the gym stuff. And I can tell you, The guys that came to me from these good grassroots coaches have such a big advantage than people who like are completely self-taught and kind of like raw efforted their way past those beginning stages.
Yeah.
But they're making some errors and now they have to unlearn them. That's
the problem. You do have to unlearn it at some point.
Yeah.
And although there's some excellent,
looks like ass because of this exact phenomenon.
Yeah, and I find the technique just gets better with time. Even if you think you mastered it, I see the improvements years later. But
yeah,
heck, if you would have had the best coach right off the bat, maybe that wouldn't have been the case. You know, like I'm sure with your brother, it's pristine because you probably drilled it in his head in year one.
Yeah, I wish I had drilled it even earlier too. Like I didn't know as much now when I was like 18 and Max was starting to get really strong. By the time he was 14, Max was getting real strong. And I didn't know as much as I know now. And I was teaching, like, I was always really influenced by Stan Efferding because I thought it was fascinating. I love Stan Efferding. I think he's a really smart guy, but I will say this, I don't feel too bad saying it. His training was not the smartest in the world, but his outside the gym variable management was insanely high level at the time. Nobody was doing what Stan did. He had the CPAP. He was doing like active recovery sessions. His diet was meticulous. He was very aware of micros, and it let him get away with maybe not his deadlift techniques. Not that he yells during his lift. He's certainly not.
I think
bracing.
He just brute force everything. It was
Yep,
just
he
the sheer
brute forced
muscle
everything.
mass.
He just trained like an animal, but without like much precision. And that kind of stuck with me. I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. If you really nail your outside the gym stuff, you can almost do whatever you want in the gym. That doesn't mean you should do whatever you want in the gym because you could be even better if you were technical. And early on, I kind of instilled that in Max. I'm like, hey, really, we're trying to put on muscle to our primary movers because one of the biggest predictors of how strong someone is the cross-sectional area of the primary movers. That's the biggest predictor. The biggest difference on average between you and someone who bench presses more than you is just how big are your shoulders, pecs, and triceps.
Especially for the bench press.
And neural efficiency, they factor in, but that's probably the easiest way to get your bench press up is to just put muscle onto the primary movers. So our training reflected that. Max and I always did a lot of bodybuilding work on our way up, tons. We would do probably should have done more squatting and benching and deadlifting for some skill practice, but we would do it, we would go hard, and then we would move on to bodybuilding. We would go home and we would eat a lot of protein. And, we probably underemphasized our technique. We got very strong.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later that Max and I realized, oh shit, I'm advanced level strength, whatever the hell we want to say that actually is. I don't really care what that actually is, but let's just say that. But I've got intermediate level form. That's a dysfunction. Because I don't necessarily think we need to go like full squat U mode, which is like you need to have perfect form to ever start putting weights on a bar. That's not how most of us did it. Most of us, when we were a beginner, we had beginner form. When we were an intermediate, we had intermediate form. And by the time we're advanced, we had advanced form. And as long as those things are matching together, I don't think the injury risk is super high. So it's like as long as our technique and our skill is progressing alongside our strength at the same rate, we're in a good spot. Now, if our strength outpaces our technique, then we probably have a dysfunction, and it's not a bad thing. That means we have an easy way to get better. It's like you said, your technique can always get better. Even if you're strong, people tell me like, I've got great bench technique. I'm a pretty good bencher. I feel like there's always things I can do better. That's a great way to get more weight on the bar is just to get more technical. If we catch our technique up to our strength level, that's going to be such an easy way for you to get stronger. Putting on muscle and getting physically stronger is hard. Getting our technique better, that's almost easier. So it's like if we identify that our technique could use some work, that's almost a good thing. That means you could lift even more without getting any bigger or stronger.
Sheesh. I tell you, Sam, like every question that I'm right about to ask you, you hit it. It's like you're predicting what I'm going to say, man. It's crazy. Like you are such a fountain of wisdom. It's insane. So
thank you.
Wow. So that's why you do more sets with more reps in reserve. This way you don't distort the technique any kind of way. Because like you rightly pointed out, the hypertrophy outcomes would be comparable. If you did the 2 sets to failure, muscularly, it'll be the same effect. But the fact that there was form breakdown potentially or some grinder reps where it's not as smooth, that would affect the accumulation of solid technique reps in the long term, and that can ultimately affect your net strength. So I guess it's also what we see in the high specificity crowd, those who start very young and, maybe they have like a slight, like the ratio shifted, it's not pure dummy strength.
Yeah, no, it's like I'm a big on like one of the things I like try to drive home to everybody that watches my channel is we can see in other sports that training specificity shouldn't be sky high from the very start. We should start more general because as you get more advanced, the amount of specificity you need to get better increases, right? So I'm sure you could remember a time when you're like, I want my bench press to go up. You could do barely any bench pressing and just hammer some like dips and some tricep extension and you would hit a bench PR. And it's like now to get better at benching, I got to do more benching, right? And it's like the amount of specificity, like you get more carryover early on. And once you get more advanced at something, the more your training needs to be that thing if you want to keep getting better. But that means we can get away with lower training specificity when we're newer. And that means we should probably take advantage of that, right? So it's like if we look at like old Soviet texts, they would have kids, they wouldn't, like, let's say they were a hockey player. They wouldn't have the kid do like 50 hours of hockey practice a week when they were a kid. They would have them play multiple sports and build a wider variety of like proprioceptive awareness, of coordination, right? All of these like different like muscular qualities. They would have them do like gymnastics and wrestling. So they're in all these different positions. And you're like, well, they're never going to find themselves upside down on the ice, hopefully. But then they know how to fall. There's all these things it does. And then as they get a little bit better in hockey, maybe they take out the wrestling and then they take out. And so as they get more advanced, more and more of their training is hockey, but they try to build this more general athletic base early on. And we want to do that as lifters. The thing is, our general athletic base, yeah, it's kind of work capacity. Yeah, it's kind of coordination, but most of all, it's muscle, right? So early on in our training, when we're a newer lifter, yeah, we want to be practicing and getting better at those main lifts. But at the same time, we can get away with not only, like, let's say only 20% of our training, like we have got time in the gym, only 20% of our time in the gym for that session is the bench press. And then 80% of it's a bunch of different bodybuilding work. Our bench press can keep going up. We don't need our specificity to be higher than that. And it's better to stimulate our body with a wider variety of stimulus, put on a bunch of muscle, and then we can play that card when we need to. When we get more advanced, we can start ramping up the specificity. And that's kind of a mistake people make, is they see these high-level lifters training with very, very high specificity. And that's what they're doing now to get better. If you rewind to what they were doing when they were your depth into the gym, they were doing more general training, whether that was on purpose because they were like aware of it, or whether it was because they were just like, I was playing football, I was just doing what the coach said.
Exactly.
No matter what, they're doing more general training earlier on to just build up their overall physicality. And then we can take that bigger overall physicality and make it better later on by ramping up our specificity. But yeah, like the proximity to failure thing, I know that's a hot topic here on YouTube, and I don't understand why people are so riled up about it.
It's all context-based.
Yeah, exactly. It's super contextual. And it's like John Meadows had a pretty reasonable theorem here, which is, hey, you could do some of your volume to failure and some of it with reps in reserve. It doesn't have to be this camp of reps in reserve for every set you do or every set to failure. John would say 2 sets with a bit in the tank and then the final set to failure. And he's like, I don't like squatting or deadlifting to failure. I just think that the risk to reward ratio is poor there. So it varies from exercise to exercise. And we could do a mix and match of them, right? Anytime we have 2 extremes on the spectrum, the answer for each person is probably going to be a little bit of a different spot, because maybe just even like physiology aside, if someone is really bad with their reps in reserve, they're going to say it's 3 and it's actually going to be 8. And it's just going to be inaccurate, right? It's just the only way they could be accurate is by hitting mechanical failure. Because like, let's say the current research that's suggesting training with reps in reserve is optimal. It's only optimal if you're actually doing it, right? And the real benefit, even if it is a bit more fatiguing to go into failure, is that you're certain what your proximity to failure is because you hit it, right? So it's like building that into training, taking the final set to failure can let you audit the prior sets. So it's like if I say, okay, my first 2 sets, I'm going to go to 2 reps in reserve, and I get 8, and I get 8, and I say last set to failure, and I get 15. Oh, I need to adjust how hard I'm going on those first 2 sets, because what I think is 2 reps in reserve isn't. So I like to, you can mix them together. I think different periods in someone's training, they'll kind of go back and forth and they'll see the benefits. Sometimes they'll accumulate a lot of volume, and then it starts to get stagnant, and then they'll go to more low rep in reserve training, and they'll get benefits from that, and they'll go back and forth. And that's basically they're accidentally periodized.
Yeah.
And that can be effective. I think they're both effective, and you can mix and match. It doesn't have to be all one. But when you're talking about like what I do, which is like block training, I think it's like the earlier in the block, we're doing more sets with more reps in reserve. And later in the block, we're doing less sets with less reps in reserve. Because we have
very
to
much RP style.
Difficulty. Yeah, and difficulty is what makes us stronger, right? On some level. I know, like, if we really wanted to get into like the jargon of it, I could give you a little bit more nuance than that. But like, we have to create difficulty. And there's 2 like major ways to create difficulty. We could either do more sets that are slightly easier, or we could do less sets, but make those sets really hard. And that's actually something that we periodize early in the training cycle, like we talked about. We could probably get about the same muscle growth from doing like 3 sets at RPE 7 or just 1 all-out set at 12, right? I've done both. And the problem is when I did the all-out set at 12, I did get stronger, but my technique decayed so much that I was like, okay, let's accumulate multiple sub-maximal sets. kind of a mix and match in the strength phase. And then in the peaking phase, we're pushing things very close to failure and doing less sets. So it's like, if we're just talking general bodybuilding enthusiasts, I just kind of like say, let's just do a mixture of them and use that final set to failure as an like a audit for the prior sets. But if we're talking periodized strength training, that is something that like everything is periodized. The volume starts high and goes low, right? The intensity starts low and goes high, right? And the proximity to failure probably starts low and goes a bit higher, right? So it's like, it's just another thing that changes across the training cycle. And I like to tell people, the way I like to teach it is just like hypertrophy phase, we're looking for big total volume PRs. How many total reps can you build at a 315 squat that look good? And then in the strength phase, we're looking for rep PRs. And in the peaking phase, we're looking for ability PRs. Like, what's the best looking singles we can do at 90 and 95%? And then we're probably ready to go. So it's like, my problem is that I would chase rep PRs in the hypertrophy phase and it would go to shit. Or I would chase total volume in the strength phase and it would go to shit. So I kind of like started putting those labels of these are our goals in each kind of phase of training.
Hard training comes in different forms. It's not just about how hard you're pushing close to failure, but just the total workload, right? For example, if you look at this, and even the frequency, like the small off squat program, I believe one of the days has you doing 10 sets of 3, and it's like 4 days a week, a minimal rest in between days. That kills people. Yet the proximity to failure is not that crazy. Like, you're leaving reps in reserve, but 10 sets in of doing triples, you're feeling like death. You know, so no one's going to say that it's not a hard program. It's probably harder than a high intensity program, even if you're doing 3 sets to failure.
It's probably too hard for 95% of athletes. Yeah, that's a really good point that I forgot to mention. I said intensity, like proximity to failure versus volume, and we can create our difficulty either way. Frequency is another massive part of that equation.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, some people, the way they train, no one session looks that hard. You're like, that's not hard training. Generally, I associate hard training with better results, as long as that hard training is also smart. But it's like, no, you have to look at the cumulative week or the cumulative month.
Yeah,
it's hard.
4th day squatting, really that's a hard workout. You know, you don't see it visually, but they're feeling every second of it.
Exactly.
So I'm curious then, what is your general approach to frequency? Because some will say that you want 72 hours of rest between strenuous sessions, even 96, just so that your absolute strength is highest, right? You're going to have the least amount of fatigue between sessions, and maybe your nervous system or your connective tissue is going to be on point and whatnot. And others will say do less work on a workout to workout basis and focus on just getting more technique in. So like, what's the general sweet spot? Or like, do you notice a big difference for strength athletes in doing like 2 times a week versus 3 or 4 or even 5 in extreme cases?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it comes down to what we were talking about earlier. Is like, if you've got a guy who's very strong and not very skilled, frequency is your best friend, right? Frequency is the one that's like, frequency is the variable that trains technique the most efficiently.
Absolutely.
Right? Just doing some. It's like if I said, hey, I'll give you $100 if you get super good at jump roping. You're not going to jump rope once a week. You're going to jump rope probably twice a day. The reason we can't just do our lifts twice a day, maybe like a weightlifter might, is because the absolute load on the bar is higher. So there's a fatigue cost that's associated with what our sport is compared to other sports that makes our frequency be lower. But it's a great tool for getting someone more proficient. So I'll give you like zoomed out view. One of the biggest things I look at is like absolute load on the bar definitely plays a big factor, right? So a guy who does, like the guys that deadlift 800 pounds, their training needs to look pretty fundamentally different than a guy who deadlifts 600 pounds, even if 100%. It's 100% for both of them. And some guys push back on that, and that really bothers me just because it's like every guy who's above a 900 deadlift starts gravitating towards either a once a week deadlift or even a once every other week. Like the Lily Bridge method is once every week. Dan Bell has been influenced by the Lily Bridge method. He goes every other week for heavy loads. Half-Thor does every other week. It's a very common training principle among the elitely strong people in the world. And it's just like some guy like Paul Carter will say, like, no, it's the same relative load. Everything in the body adapts. Like they could just train more often. You think Half-Thor and all these guys didn't try squatting twice a week? Like, you think that didn't cross their coach's mind and they'd be way better? Like, this is a documented thing. The absolute load on the bar does have some bearing on a recovery. So when you get like a really, really strong, super heavyweight athlete, our frequency is going to look low. And then we can probably use some tricks to get them a little bit more skillful. And that's where we'll do like technical sessions. Whereas like a lighter athlete, even if they're an advanced lighter athlete, the load on the bar is a little bit less. So they could get away with, they don't need the technical session. They could just train that lift twice that week, right? So that's one thing that factors in heavily is like if someone's really efficient, they can do the lift more often because the lift will bang them up less. That's one thing I really observe pretty chronically is if someone like has really good control of their scaps and really efficient bench press technique, they might be able to bench press 3 days a week and feel great, right? Even if they're pretty strong. And you could take a guy who's much weaker than them, who has very poor control of his scaps, his elbows are all over the place, he's shrugging, his hips are lifting up, and he'll fall apart trying to bench press 3 days a week. His shoulders will feel terrible. So how skilled you are at the lift can let you do it more often. Absolute strength brings it back down. But let's stop talking in like abstracts and let's just talk practically. I think most lifters could benefit from doing one deadlift session a week and then one day where they're doing like more of a pure hinge pattern with a bit of load reduction. So an RDL or a stiff leg, because most guys they need to get their hip hinge better. Because it's not something we do in sports to do this pure hamstring stretch hip hinge, but it's a fundamental part of lifting that I would say most guys, 1 day of stiff legs or 1 day of RDLs and 1 day of deadlifts get some pretty good results. I usually like to see 2 squats, whether it's 2 full squats or 1 squat and 1 like fairly specific squat with a little bit of load reduction. So like a pause squat. And then 2 to 3 pressing sessions per week is where I find most athletes gravitate around. Now, when you get like, let's say I've got an advanced female client, right? So their technique is very efficient and the the absolute weight on the bar isn't that high. They might start pushing past those and squatting 3 days a week, 4 days a week. They might be benching 4 days a week. That's when like you start pushing to those extreme ends where you have someone who's very efficient and the absolute load on the bar isn't that crazy. Or we go to the other end and you have like, maybe I've got I do have a super heavyweight athlete that is not that technical. He pulls heavy once every other week, right? And he's trying to pull his first 800 pretty soon. He'll be my 5th, which I'm quite proud of. And so we're doing like technical sessions to try to get his technique better. Of course, we're not just going to ignore that, but deadlifting buries him. So we're like, okay, we're going to go like rather than 1 hinge, 1 deadlift every week, we're going to do 1 week is RDL, week A is RDL, week B is deadlift, right? So we can start to deviate away from that. It's the same thing. It's like I like this idea of a 10-week training cycle going from 60 to 100%, and then based on how the athlete responds and the descriptions of those athletes, then we because most coaches start with like a cookie cutter template that's their method, right? This idea of the ultra flexible coach. Usually that just means that you're like a jack of all trades and a master of none. You kind of need to have your method, but you need to have flexibility within your method to then customize it. Because it's like if I tried to write a conjugate program for somebody, it's going to be bad. I could whack myself off about how I'm the most flexible coach. I give people whatever they want, right? And I can program all styles. I can program all styles, but not well. You're only going to truly know the nuances of what to look for. Like a high-level conjugate coach has specific things they're looking for.
Absolutely.
I don't know to look for. So I do have like a method that I start with and then I tailor it to the athlete. But I think most coaches that are good definitely start with a base, right? And that base that would be my base frequency is usually like a 1.5 frequency for the deadlift, a 2-ish frequency for the squat, and then a 2 to 3 for the bench press. Maybe earlier in an athlete's training career, we're trying to train more general. That's 2 days of horizontal pressing and 1 day of vertical pressing because they can get away with it. Right.
Yeah.
And then once they get more advanced, maybe we do go to 3 horizontals and just do our vertical pressing as like afterward, as supplemental work.
I'm surprised you put 3 horizontal over even the squat. I feel like that would be the exercise that you could do more frequency on, comparatively speaking. Like a lot of guys get beat up shoulders from high frequency benching.
I guess I should include that, right? It really depends on whether the athlete has their technique really dialed in on the bench press, because I definitely think that 3 will get in the way if you aren't an efficient bench presser. But I think the same thing could be said for the squat, right? To push towards 3 in general, we need to have pretty good control over outside the gym variables. We got to be sleeping, we got to be eating, and we got to be mechanically efficient at the lift, right? So it's like, I guess you could say that about any lift.
When
if the guy is tremendously mechanically efficient, it might be beneficial to push into the frequency a little bit more. But sometimes you want to go the other way, right? If you've got a lift that comes really easy to you, you can either push really hard into that lift and get like a bunch of Instagram clout off of it, right? And like dedicate even more and more and more of your training economy to that lift that comes easy to you. Or you could say, this one comes easy to me. That means I can get away with doing a little bit less and I can take that training economy and dedicate it to the things that don't come easy to me in my efforts to be a well-rounded strength athlete. right? And so it's a bad feedback loop because being really good at one thing definitely gets you a little bit more attention than being well-rounded, but not having anything that stands out. But I've always romanticized the idea of well-rounded strength. And it's like, let's use the fact that this lift comes really easy to us to get away with doing less. So I can spend more time on, let's say, the deadlift, which doesn't come as easy.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what do you define as moving weights efficiently? Does that mean using the best, like the technique that allows you to lift the most amount of weight, maybe even reducing range of motion, like being less, like not as good developmentally, but better competitively? So like the bench press, are you talking about the super wide grip with the arch specifically? Like if someone's using a close grip or like a medium grip, they're not gonna be able to do as much frequency, right? So like, what do you mean by efficient technique exactly across the big three?
That's a great question, right? So it's like efficient technique. Efficient is dependent on the task, right? So it's like efficient technique for the maximizing of powerlifting competitive bench press is like big arch wide grip, right? Efficient technique for a pure bodybuilder is the exact opposite. It's how can we tax the pecs the most? Right. And it's like, okay, cool. If you're a pure bodybuilder, that frequency is probably going to come down because what getting better at bench pressing for a bodybuilder means is the exact opposite. Your pecs get more fatigued from the same weight. Whereas a strength athlete, their pecs will get less fatigued from the same weight. And that's what dictates the technique being efficient. Right. But most of all, for me, the big thing is like I bench press with a thumb away from the smooth. Right. So a relatively narrow grip. And the reason I've always done this is because early in my training career, I took my grip a little bit wider. And it was stronger for sure in the short term. I could bench press more with that wider grip, but I would notice that I would get small shoulder, like rotator cuff tweaks or small pec tweaks. And looking back, it was because I didn't have enough scapular control to get away with that wider grip. But I noticed, I'm like, hey, if I bring my hands into a thumb away from the smooth, I noticed that I get banged up a lot less. I'm a little bit weaker, not that much weaker, but I'm a little bit weaker with the narrower grip, but I can do more work without getting banged up. Exactly. Right. And so I figured, okay, well, even if in the short term this is weaker, if I can do more productive training without these mini setbacks, I'll be stronger with this grip in no time. And I haven't looked back since. I did this 10 years ago when I was first going in. I was benching like 155, and I noticed the wide grip was stronger, but it was hurting me. I brought my grip in to something that was less injurious, didn't bang me up as much, so that I could put in a lot of work. And that's kind of like, I think a lot of the guys, they go for just that, what's short term the strongest, and it'll either bang them up a lot. So like guys will jam the bar super low on their back for a low bar squat, and they're constantly dealing with wrist, elbow, bicep, shoulder pain, and it stunts their bench progression.
Absolutely.
So it's like, you're stronger in the short term, but you could do more work and you could be a better power lifter. We brought that up a little bit and developed the legs a little bit more. And that's the other part of the equation that like obviously you're aware of, which is like when it's kind of like specificity too early. Like if we don't do our bodybuilding work early on, when we can get away with it. It's the same thing as if we do an ultra low bar squat, a very wide sumo, and a very wide bench press with a big arch. Those exercises lose their developmental effect, right? So like doing sets of 8 on this ultra arch bench press is not a good hypertrophy stimulus, right? So it's like, if you have an athlete like that, they're probably just not going to be gaining muscle like they should early on. Maybe they should be using a primary technique of like high bars, conventionals, and narrower grip bench press early on to build their base. And then as their base builds and they're trying to become a better and better power lifter, they then adjust their technique to be less developmental and more specific. And then once you have an athlete that's using techniques that are like maximizing leverages on the platform, then we have to make some programming adjustments, right? So it's like, maybe we have this athlete with the big arch and the wide grip on the bench press, and their secondary day in their first 4 weeks of their every training block is going to be a close grip Larson press, right? Because it's like, we got to keep our specific work in there to be skilled at it. That has to stay. Maybe it's only a little bit, maybe it's a reasonable bit, but we have to kind of make a deviation away from our competition technique so it becomes a valuable training stimulus. That's the cool thing about some lifters, even at the very highest level. Like John Hack is the example everybody knows. Their competition technique is still a very potent training stimulus. So they don't need to introduce this like lower specificity at the beginning, higher specificity at the end of the training cycle. John Hack can just high bar squat for volume to get his leg bigger, high bar squat for 5s to get him stronger, high bar squat for 1s to get better at singles. Same thing with the conventional deadlift, same thing with that moderate grip bench press. So he doesn't need to have this sliding specificity. But if you took someone like maybe Sean Noriega, whose technique is very efficient, he maybe needs to mix in a little bit more variation to create things that are a little bit more disruptive, right? Like the close grip Larsons, the high bar squats, the conventional deadlifts, or the RDLs.
Very interesting. So the efficiency goes both ways in a sense.
Yep.
You have to do more shit on the side to account for little gaps. So if you're like a super wide grip bencher, you're gonna have to do some close grip Larson pressing, or else that can bleed some strength in the future, right? Whereas the opposite, if all you do is self-limiting variations, well, you can kind of get away with that by itself, and then when you transition, like, you'll be good. You know?
Yeah, and it's just like it depends on the level of the athlete. Because for most people, I agree with you, right? You could probably spend the whole off season just doing close grips, right?
Yeah.
Once you get to like a really high performer, I've tried having them do that, and it's just like then there's just this rough period where their technique on their comp motion feels so junky. It takes them a while to get it back. So I'd be like, let's just keep it in there a little bit, so that way you never lose the feel for it. So it's just like we're basically just putting let's just use the bench press because that's the one that people like to talk about the most. If we've got this ultra efficient comp bench, we're basically just putting that on maintenance in the offseason enough that we're staying about the same level of technically proficient at it. And then we can dedicate everything else past maintenance to this variation that's maybe going to be more productive for building muscle, right?
So maintain the technique.
I don't like having the athletes get away from it completely just because they always get grumpy at me when they're like getting back into it and it feels like shit. And I'm like, we could probably just do like maintenance technique level stuff in the off season. That's not going to drain you that much. I would rather have you do like a little bit, you know?
But the potential is still there, right? So like, does it really make a difference? Like if in the long term, if you know you're going to end up competing and reintroduce that specificity, what if all you do is the hard stuff to get better recovery, not beat you up as much? And then when you do that little peaking phase, everything's going to come back. Because the thing is, right, if we're going back to our example, the bench press, would you agree that it's the least technical of the big three?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's even a study that was looking at like cross-sectional area of like the primary movers, and on the bench press it was like the biggest predictor, and on the deadlift it's still a big predictor, but it's a little bit less of a big predictor. As you know, obviously the deadlift is a little bit more neural, like how efficient your technique as well as how efficient your nervous system is, and that's why you get some guys who don't even have crazy long arms that are kind of skinny that have gnarly conventional deadlifts because they're very neurally efficient. Right.
Yeah, I think the squats are
like you don't see as many skinny bench pressers without the big arch. To answer your question, I think that's like a point of debate among like the coaches I look up to, right? Like in one camp, you can look to one of the best coaches in the world. Josh Bryant is very low specificity for the offseason, right? Kind of following what you say, like let's choose self-limiting stuff. Let's put on muscle. Let's use things that limit the load so we're less fatigued and we can handle more work. So his off seasons for his athletes, very unspecific, very general. They're doing like lots of weighted carries. They're doing like hack fields. They're doing a lot of different stuff.
I guess,
and then his athletes will then only ramp up they only ramp up their specificity once they sign up for a meet and they're 10 weeks out. Basically following the exact premise you laid out, which is like, hey, in 10 weeks we can get back to technically proficient. And then on the other side of the coin, you have the coaches more on like the tested side of powerlifting who are like, no, like this is our sport. We don't ever stop throwing the shot put in like a full spin. We don't not spin for the off season because the skill ceiling, like you said, we can always get better at technique. And I think that's the crux of like the argument is like, on one hand, you're right. In 10 weeks, we can get back to good technique, but they would argue, well, then you're never going to get better. Right. And it's like, you can see an argument both ways. You could probably see one athlete extremely technical might benefit more from the lower specificity, and then maybe there's one athlete who's like, really, your technique does need to get better. Let's keep it a little bit specific, right? So I think it's just going to vary from athlete to athlete. And it's like one of those things where it's like, you're not going to hear me come on here and say like, oh, one of these camps is idiots. There are people much smarter than me on both sides of this, which I take it to mean both answers are viable. It's just context dependent. Like whether that specificity kind of stays in or whether we do take these true off seasons. Because you got like Chad Wesley Smith used to be like advocate for specificity, and he says looking back on his career he wished he took a little bit more dedicated varied off seasons, both from a like getting less banged up perspective and as well as from like a mental burnout perspective, which you can't overstate that. Like that's a big benefit for Josh Bryant's athletes with the general off seasons is they get to do fun shit, because it's like realistically, you know what holds people back more than anything else? It's not natty status, it's not lifting technique, it's none of these things. It's burning out is the is the thing that
burnout
stops people the most from reaching their potential. So it's like training enjoyment, it really matters. Training in a way that you like, that you're not going to burn out on, even if it's a little bit suboptimal, is huge, because the most likely thing to stop you, random viewer, from getting 315 is burning out before you get there. That's the most likely thing. So it's like a little bit of enjoyment, like making training decisions based on our enjoyment is addressing a very real problem. It's not just being undisciplined, right? Because it's like if you stick to the optimal program and it burns you out and you hate training, you're going to be outperformed by the you in another universe who is just getting after it in a training program that you enjoy.
I wholeheartedly agree. And that's one of the reasons why I like conjugate so much, because I have all this movement variability and I can do whatever I like. I'm not married to any exercise. And the general strength is they're similar to Josh Bryant. So I guess it also, I mean, every perspective is correct, right? It all depends where you're coming from. But I would say how many times you compete in a year probably makes a really big difference here. Like if you just do a competition once in a blue moon, then I don't think the specificity matters as much. But if you're doing it every couple months, then obviously you're going to want to have it in there, because you don't want to have to wait 10 weeks every time just to get perfect again.
Yeah, it might even vary from lift to lift, right? Because it's like I do know some athletes that like they could do exactly what you're saying, which is like in the off season on the bench press, they get pretty far away from it and it'll come back to them, right?
Yeah, real fast.
But I do notice high level sumo deadlifters, or at least the ones that I've coached, don't like it, right? Like the really, really technical sumo guys, it's it's so precise that like that time relearning it is just so frustrating. They don't want to get away from it. And they would rather just like, hey, I will do RDLs on a separate day. I'll bust ass on RDLs afterward. Like I'm willing to do the work to bring up whatever musculature the sumo is failing to develop sufficiently. But this is my sport. I really want to be good at it, right? Agree. So it's like, I think it can be vary from lift to lift. Like you might say like, I'm so-and-so. I like to get away from my bench pressing in the off season and do some overhead pressing and some incline pressing and some close gripping just to get more jacked, because I know it's going to fuck. Like as soon as I get back into my arch, it's just going to be easier. It's just instantly easier. So I can, most of the year I can do that. But you know, like, okay, well, I know that doesn't apply to my sumo, because we don't need, like you said, everything is context dependent, and it doesn't need to be every lift you treat the same. You might say, I notice my specificity needs to stay high on this one, and this one I get away. I like not just get away, I benefit from those off seasons on this one, right? So it's like it can also be lift by lift. And I would just put out there to the viewer, sumo tends to be one that's just like there's so much room. There's like the skill ceiling is actually pretty high for a good sumo. It's like we should probably like that's just another thing we should be working on in the off season is climbing our ranks of that skill ceiling. Whereas maybe like you said, the bench press is probably the least technical.
Yeah,
that skill ceiling isn't quite as high. Let's build those physical qualities, because it's like Julius Maddox is the strongest bench presser to ever live, and he twitches his right leg during his bench press. There's nothing good about that, but he's that strong, so it doesn't matter.
I agree. I think it is movement dependent. And the sumo example is a good one because, I mean, I started doing them again recently, and I noticed that my strength is very comparable to what it was last year, despite the fact that I added like, 60 pounds on my good morning strength. So I know that the absolute strength is there. That's a fact. And the posterior chain is bigger. But I was so rusty on that movement pattern because I hadn't done it for so long that it just, I didn't really improve that much. Now, obviously, there's a PR there if you give me a month. But for that exercise specifically, whereas the bench, like if you're doing an incline bench, there's just more range of motion. So what's the difference between doing a bench press here versus there? Like the technique is going to carry over, if you ask me. It's more so if you go to the upper extremities that there's going to be more of a difference. So I think it's also how close enough it is to the competition movement that's going to determine how much technique work you're going to need. Like if it's close enough, you can probably get away with it.
Well, and I guess I've been beating the drum of specificity a bit here, but I probably use a lot more variety in my training than many of like my contemporaries. Right now, my goal is to chase down a 600 bench press. It's useless because I'm a strong man. We don't compete in the bench press, but I don't want to look myself in the mirror and be like, I was at 565 and then I focus on my overhead for strongman. I never did it. I want to get it done just to say I've done it, right? Because it's like that would be the first lift that I've done that I feel is truly, truly up there. So I'm like, okay, I have a hard time training my like technical overhead stuff for strongman and bench press at the same time because my pecs get so tight that my overhead position is bad. So I'm like, okay, we're going to focus on the bench press for now, and I'm going to chase down that 600. And right now I'm bench pressing 3 days a week. My first day is just a vanilla bench press. Right now, not wearing any wrist wraps, not wearing anything. My second bench press day is bench press on the Yukon bar, which is just like the Titan Duffalo bar.
Awesome.
It's not the highest build quality, but I like that it's got a bigger bow to it than the Duffalo bar, because I bench, like I said, with a pretty close grip. So when I bench with a Buffalo bar, the range of motion is like only a quarter of an inch more, whereas on this bar, it's like a full inch extra. So it's just like you said, it's close enough that I'm still practicing my technique. I'm still setting up the same way I would on a bench press. I'm still getting under and getting tight. I'm unracking the same way. I'm controlling the negative. My grip width is the same. There's so much that I'm still practicing, but it's a different movement, right? I've got a 4 inch of extra range of motion on this different bar. And then my third day is a bench press against light bands. So it's like, on one level, you could say, well, I'm only doing a comp bench press once a week, but the other 2 variations I'm doing are so similar that I feel like I'm practicing the exact same motion 3 times per week, right? So it's like, I think that a well-selected variation is not only going to give you like a little bit different like physical adaptation, right? Like maybe my pecs are going to be bigger and stronger from the Yukon day, and my triceps are going to be bigger and stronger from that little bit of added accommodating resistance. So there's a little bit of a difference in like physiology in terms of our adaptation, but there's also a little bit of a difference in skill, right? Because a really well-selected variation is going to make you stronger, but it's also going to give you a better understanding of the movement that you want to get better at. It's going to highlight a certain technical element. Maybe the Yukon bench press highlights drawing my sternum up to meet the bar halfway, opening up through the pecs, rowing it into me at the bottom, keeping tight and pressing. And then when I go back to my regular bench press, I'm not just stronger, but I've highlighted a specific skill that I wanted to work on, and that variation teaches me how to do that. Maybe the bands teach me to extend through without pressing through and into protraction and pressing into my shoulders. Maybe I keep my shoulder blades a little bit tighter, and I can punch into the bar and accelerate the bar by wedging my elbow between my wrist and my shoulder. Maybe it teaches that. And squat's the best example of this, where it's like a pause squat in a different position might teach you, hey, I need to not rock into my heels. A pin squat might teach you, hey, I need to stay tight up until that last very moment. Right? Like a tempo squat, all of these things, yes, they're making you physically stronger in this unique way, but debatably even more important, they're teaching you a different angle of the same movement to make you even more skilled.
Wow. So even though you're not training the absolute skill itself, it's teaching you certain attributes that can help that inevitable skill. So it ends up working out despite being lower specificity, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's like highlighting a specific thing.
If you
man, I'm losing tension in that last little bit of the squat. Maybe a tempo or maybe a pause is going to teach me something about that movement that's going to carry over. And that's why exercise selection, I think, is a really big part of training, because it's like any exercise is going to make you stronger. If we're moving from point A to B with resistance and overloading, anything will make you stronger. But a really well-selected variation is going to target a specific part of a movement, not just in a strength terms, but in a skill terms. That's something that I really like that Mike Tushurer does. So I consider to be one of the best powerlifting coaches of all time. And I always thought it was interesting that his specificity was never that high. He was the guy who was like, no, I'm fine with using bands and chains. Like, I know that, like, I know we've all said poo-poo to them, but it's like, as long as it's like not a crazy amount of band tension to where the weight in the bottom is still relatively heavy, maybe that highlights something. And he would say like, oh, the pin squat, like, yes, it's doing this physically, but it's also teaching me things. And that was a big change in my coaching, was when I started thinking of those variations rather, because I've been a meathead my whole life. I'm an idiot. I always think in terms of like, make this muscle stronger. Like, it's like, it's not just make this muscle stronger. It's also, you got to get better at the movement. It's a sport. As much as we like to say, like, mean it and say powerlifting isn't a sport, it acts like a sport. It looks like a sport. We may as well kind of train it like a sport, even if we don't think it is one. So it's like, we have to get more skillful. And so rather than thinking, oh, my lockout's bad, I got to get my glutes stronger, I had started thinking about, okay, well, what variation of the deadlift is going to highlight the technical fault I'm making?
Yo, I love that, Sam. So, but when are you joining Team Conjugate? Because it sounds like you train similar to me, just with a different periodization structure, but the approach to exercise selection is exactly the same.
I would say that's very accurate, right? Like, it's like our training, like in terms of exercise selection, looks very similar. I just take those exercises, and then rather than rotating them, I take them on more of a linear progression. But it's like, it's fundamentally like, it just depends on what lens we're looking through. Like, if you look at it from a numerical progression lens only, our training looks completely different, right? Like, worlds apart. But if we look at it from an exercise selection of like close variations that shift emphasis, that are like still pretty close. Like I like your bench press training. I think it looks pretty good to me.
Well, thank
right?
you.
And it's like, so it's like, if you look at it from exercise like selection perspective, pretty similar, right? So it's like, it's all about like the lens that you're looking through. And I just really early on, like this idea of like, early on, the reason I kind of gravitated away from conjugate, right, is that like when we're initially exposed to something for the first time in a while, most of our adaptation to that is neural, right?
Yeah.
Like we're getting better at that movement. And I was like, well, that means it's less muscular, right? I want to be able to repeat something to the point where my neural adaptations have already been made and I'm pushing to the limits of muscular adaptation. That was basically one of the big things that draw me to like, hey, I'm going to pick a variation just like you're going to pick a variation. Let's just say we pick close grip bench press. I'm going to run it for 10 weeks rather than put it into a rotation. That's the only real difference.
I agree in the neural sense, but with conjugate, right, when you train it for so long, eventually that 10 weeks or whatever is built in throughout the many years because you've done the rotation so many times and now everything is technically proficient. No matter, like, you can rotate it infinitely and your technique won't even change. And now it's going to be all maximum hypertrophy. And that's like when conjugate really shines. It's the more you do it.
Yeah, it's like what Dave Tate says, right? Is like everything is linear if you zoom out, right? It's like, linearly chipping away at these core rotational exercises.
Yeah,
right? And I think I guess that's one of the reasons that I've gravitated away from conjugate is like, I do believe once you get to a very high level of executing it, it can work really well. Like if you're a lot of the problems people have run into with conjugate weren't actually the periodization. It was the exercise selection that they assumed you needed to have to be doing conjugate, right? Because conjugate was heavily influenced by equipped powerlifting. It makes sense to do things with heavy emphasis on the top end of the range of motion, right? Because we have a suit to help us in the bottom. Most of the variations they would pick at West Side would be top end focus. And by most, I mean all. They were doing like rack pulls, bands, chains, partials, right? Everything in the rotation was emphasizing the top half of the lift. And I've always said, if you made a conjugate program, but for the raw lifter, where instead we do the exact opposite, because without that support, the bottom range of motion is always the hardest. Even if we miss at the lockout on the deadlift, it's probably because we messed up our positions off the floor. So if we just make a conjugate program where not all, but most of our stuff instead focuses around the bottom range of motion. So instead of doing a board press, we do a Yukon bar. Instead of doing like a rack pull, we do a pause deadlift right off the floor. And we like do a pause squat instead of a high box squat. And we do all of these things that shift the emphasis towards the bottom. That's a highly productive program, even if it's not what I do. I've always thought the conjugate bashing was a little bit silly because it's produced great athletes. I just think that a lot of the problems people were running into trying to scale it to raw lifting was more about the exercise selection remaining for equipped lifting than it was actually the problem with the periodization. I've always said, if you specialized into that bottom end emphasis conjugate program, and these are my indicator lifts, I think the problem for me is that the skill ceiling is kind of high. Whereas like if you're new, you can mangle conjugate. You can do it real bad. You can fall deep down this rabbit hole of this is fun as shit to where it gets really unproductive. So I think that's part of what drew me to it because I didn't know shit back then. So I would have messed it up. Right. So it's like, I think the ability to mess up a conjugate program is higher than the ability to mess up a 10-week block. Yeah. If you don't fiddle with that block and you just put in your volume on those motions you've selected to get better at, usually it will work. Whereas it definitely takes a lot more thought and it definitely takes a lot more precision and objectivity to execute a conjugate program at a high level. Like I have no problem with it at all. I just think that like a lot of people kind of will do it badly, which is why I'm like, maybe we get our foot into the water and gain our training understanding using a more like traditional American block style.
Right. Honestly, I couldn't agree more. Even with myself, it took a long time to really master the system. Like I would say maybe 3 years ago is when I dialed it in, including with the auto-regulation, borrowing some concepts from Mike this year. I feel like that's when it really came together. But I've been doing it since the summer of 2014. So we can say it took a good 6 years of experimenting with different exercises, seeing what has carryover, see what messes up your technique and whatnot. And there's a lot of fiddling. But once you get it down, it works well. And it's like you said, the exercise selection. It's all bottom based. You're just reversing what the geared guys would do. And we see some top guys doing this, like, Matt Winning, Burley Hawk. And it's not even in a powerlifting context as well, because that's usually a criticism that it lacks specificity towards the big three. But what about, having a strong overhead press or a good way to dip or way to pull up? You know, if you're using it in just in a general athletic context or just for hypertrophy, then it's fine, you know?
And
Yeah.
I consider myself, more so than anything else, I consider myself a strength enthusiast. I don't compete in powerlifting anymore. A lot of the athletes I coach are powerlifters, but I compete in strongman because I guess my passion has always been, and that, I guess this was my problem when I was a
You
powerlifter.
like being rounded up.
Is
Yeah.
what I liked was
Exactly.
not powerlifting. It was this idea of general strength training,
Yeah.
whole body strength, right? And it's like, okay, well, of the existing strength sports, strongman seems to be the one that's most designed with that idea of everything kind of strength. Like, it's still, there's still specificity involved in strongman, right? Of course, like once we know the event, specificity applies, but this idea of a little bit more head to toe strength, I really like that.
Yeah.
And that's always been like what I'm most passionate about. So it's like, I've got some athletes that are like, Sam, I don't care about my bench press. I'm only going to do straight overhead. That's fine. Like, similar principles apply, you know.
Yeah.
And like, I'm very, that's up my alley. Like, I went on a real rampage with my weighted dips.
You
Like
got
2
strong
months
on
ago.
those, man. Your body weight especially. Sheesh.
Yeah, I
think
I got to like my body weight is like 260, and I think I did like body weight plus 270 for like 5 or 6.
That's insane.
And I was like, I got to the point where I was like, okay, I think at this point, this is not a weakness of mine, and I'm just doing these because I'm good at them. I should probably go do something I'm bad at.
Yeah, well, that's how you get strong. Train what you suck at.
Yeah,
and address your weak points.
Yeah, for like, I always thought that was funny. That it's like that idea of just find stuff you're bad at and do that. It's like, that is a really underbaked thought process. Like, it's more complicated than that, but it works really, really well. It works way better than it has any right to. Just find stuff you're bad at and do it. It tends to perform pretty well as a training philosophy, even if it is like oversimplified.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
Like, I would see like these guys at the gym. They're just like, hey, are you bad at pause deadlifts? I'm like, yep. They're like, do pause deadlifts. I was like, I did it, and it worked. And I was like, okay, I guess that shit works.
Yeah, and if it prevents you from breaking your head and it's gonna allow you to be consistent, then go for it. You know.
Well, like I said, there was a guy quite strong here where I live in Montana. That was like a big conjugate guy who got very strong. He benched like 440, like very, very strong guy, doing like raw conjugate. And that was the one thing I noticed most of all with his athletes, was that they never burnt out. They were always excited to come in to do like, okay, we've got like speed deads and max effort squats today. Let's go, like, especially with a training crew. But this idea of like competition, this idea of pushing your limits each week, week after week, like his guys, because all the guys at the gym, I hope they don't watch this, but a lot of the guys at the gym gave him a really hard time. They would be like, don't you know that like specificity and RPE is where it's at now? Oh, most of the best powerlifters are doing this now. Like, why are you still doing conjugate? And the guys at the gym gave him a really, really hard time because he was one of the trainers at the gym, and all the other trainers were more like USAPL specificity guys, and they were really like, I don't think they were that nice to him. But I noticed that a lot of their athletes were burning out, and his athletes stuck around, and they're like, they were progressing. And it was like this, it's like that matters. Like I said earlier, the most likely thing to limit people is getting to the point where you don't want to go to the gym and then not going to the gym. So it's like, that is alone massive benefit of conjugate, is the fact that it prevents training from feeling stagnant and stale.
A lot of the high specificity guys, the same stuff week in and week out, year after year, it could get stale, you know? So I guess you have to really be passionate about it. And for that, I understand, you know?
I like higher specificity training. You know, it's like, I will, with my training, definitely is more repetitive than yours by the nature of the periodization. But it's like, that meshes with my psychology. Like, I'm a very neurotic type of person. I write everything in my notebook. I drink the same number of milliliters of water every day to try to be precise in my preparation for training. So it's like, this idea of repetitive training to me is soothing, because then I know everything about it. I do it over and over and over and over. Right. Whereas like, you have some other guys where, oh my God, it does not mesh with their psychology. And it's like, at some point you got to factor that in. I've had people that hired me and just got bored as shit on my program really fast. And I told them like, hey, like, this is nothing personal. Like, I have a methodology that I have learned the nuances of. I don't think I could give you a good program outside of that methodology. Right. I think we're a bad fit. I think you should find a coach that's going to have more varied training. There's nothing wrong with that. Right.
No,
but it's like,
that's very honest.
There's some people that, like, especially in a strongman, conjugate's pretty big in strongman because our sport is so varied that like the specificity argument applies a little bit less. But there are some guys that you try to get them doing the same thing 3 weeks in a row, and they want out.
Well, I really like the emphasis that we all develop our niche little way of programming, and you should stick to that. And sometimes, your athlete is incompatible with the way that you program things, and that's okay. You redirect them to someone that you trust, and that's it.
Yeah, I really hurt myself with this idea that if I was a truly great coach, I would work great with every athlete. It's like that was wrong. That was not true, right? And it wasn't until I watched more high-level coaches be like, well, this is how I do it, right? And it's like, yeah, it's bad if we're too cookie cutter. Like if you give everybody the same program, you're like, this is how I do it. You're just being lazy, right? Because it does take time and effort to make adjustments. So you need to have some flexibility within your method, but there's a limit to how flexible you should be, because it's like not every coach and athlete is going to be a great fit, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I love that, man. So you were talking earlier about the bench press and how you want to do 600 pounds. What has your experience been in terms of carryover to the overhead press? And in a strongman context, it's actually a sort of a push press, right? It's not strict. Like so what are your thoughts on benching to improve your overhead press? Because a lot of guys will say do close grip work specifically, because you are working the delts and triceps a lot. And what are your thoughts on doing strict overhead pressing compared to doing more push pressing? Because if you're not being judged on the strict element, then should you just do push presses, or like how does that work out?
So I guess I'll give you my thoughts on it. Right? Is the same thing we talked about earlier about specificity across the training career applies, right? So it's like, if you've got a strongman that's very new and they really just aren't filled out in their frame, I would have them do close grip bench presses all the time, right? Their pressing training is going to be in all kinds of plans, right? Because we're just trying to develop their physical, their just overall physicality, right? And close grip bench press is a great way to do that. As they get better and they're like, okay, cool, you're pretty muscular now. Now we really got to start getting better at the axle and the log and the circus dumbbell. A bigger and bigger percentage of our training is going to be overhead with leg, because they're also going to be doing strict press early on, right? Their training is going to be all kinds of pressing. They're going to do dips, close grips. I probably wouldn't do much wide grip work in general, because the pecs aren't a physical quality that's very important for strongman. It's more about the triceps and the shoulders. So closer grip on most stuff, but they're going to do the inclines, the strict overhead. They're going to do some push pressing, and they're going to do a little bit of log, a little bit of axle. As they get more advanced, a bigger percentage of their training is going to be incorporating their legs, because that's another thing with a very high skill ceiling. And a lot of strongmen are real raw, strict pressing, boosts your testosterone if you need your leg. It's like, dude, we compete with our legs. Yeah. I don't lose points because I was good at using my legs and you weren't. So it's like, why would I be bad at that skill? So a bigger percentage of our work is going to be overhead with leg drive, whether that's a split jerk, a push jerk, or a push press. I like push pressing because I think it's going to carry over to a wider variety of things. I have a very hard time scaling like a split jerk to a log because it's so cumbersome and big. You need a little bit more of a strict element to it. But I would say for strongman, early on, we're doing a lot of variety in pressing. Later on, we're doing a bit more of it with legs. Although in the off season, we can focus a little bit more on the strict if we're good with them, right? And it kind of varies from athlete to athlete. Some guys just have such great shoulder strength, but they're so bad at using their legs and they undertrain their squat that it's like, no, you need to get better. That's the easiest way for us to get better. Whereas some guys, all their strength is in the lower body, and they're so good at using their legs because they're so strong. That's like in the offseason, let's take your strength away, work on our strict press, and as soon as you add the legs back in, you're going to exceed your prior best, right? And probably it's pretty common to just keep something in there for tricep strength. So like maybe a close grip incline, a close grip bench press, or a dip where we're locking the elbow with a high amount of weight over and over, just to keep the triceps like a little bit extra strong.
Like a heavy tricep compound, not just extensions.
Exactly. Most guys will pick one that they find meshes with them, even when their training specificity is really high. Like Matusz Kieliszkowski does dips. Big Z used to do close grip benches. I guess Ed Hall used to do just regular bench presses as his big, like lock the elbows with a lot of weight. So it's like everybody kind of keeps it, for the most part, just something that's a big tricep compound alongside their overhead with leg drive. A lot of the top guys use a ton of strict work, and they're almost getting away with it despite, because it's like
they're just so damn strong.
Exactly. You're a 400-pound freak of nature, and that's why you're getting away with being unproficient with your legs. But it's like, to do that, you're having to spend a disproportionate amount of your time in the gym training pressing volume to be able to be an elite presser with like borderline strict.
With less, yeah.
And it's like, it's not worth that many points in the contest compared to the percentage of your training you're spending doing it. We'd be better off becoming efficient with our legs. And then let's go to the reverse, right? Let's say the guy is trying to increase his bench press. Early on, again, I like having this wider variety of pressing. Like I don't think push pressing is a great use of time for building your bench press. I just don't. I would stick to strict press for vertical presses. But let's say we're a guy early in his training career, we're doing our overheads, inclines, dips, bench presses. As he gets bigger and more jacked and stronger, more and more of that's going to be flat benching. And I think as you get more advanced, you're less and less likely to see carryover from the overhead. Part of that's because the more advanced the bench presser, even if their arch isn't big, by creating good back tightness, getting up on the traps a little bit, and creating a thoracic arch, we're going to make the press a little bit of a decline press, just like you do, just like I do, because like we incline bench press more than we overhead, we flat bench more than we incline, and our total weight on dips is more than we bench press. So the musculature that presses downward, just based off physiology, is a bit bigger and a bit stronger than the muscles that press upward. So to bench press a lot of weight and may debatably keep the shoulders healthy, we want to turn that press into a little bit of a decline, right? So it's like, okay, well, that looks less like an overhead. I like to, for all of my athletes, at least once a week, press in the vertical plane, even if they're so advanced and their bench press technique is like so advanced that they don't see carryover from the overhead. I find that keeping a respectable level of strength in the vertical plane is good insurance for keeping the shoulders healthy. Just general strength around the shoulder girdle. If I just say, hey, if we just do a bit of rear delts and a bit of overhead pressing, and I don't care what the overhead is for some of these athletes. It doesn't even matter. Exactly. Nope. It's not carrying over anymore. You could hop on your favorite machine. It could be dumbbells. It could be standing. It could be seated. I just want you to be kind of like not even like monstrously strong. I just want you to be kind of respectably strong in the vertical plane. And those athletes' shoulders tend to ache a little bit less because they've got that little bit of surplus of strength.
You know, Sam, I found the exact same thing to be true in my training. In fact, I even went close to a year without doing any standing overhead work. It was just back supported. And it is my favorite variation. But I did notice that the scapulohumeral rhythm was less refined. So now I do at least, it's not even a lot of volume. I don't even care about the carryover aspect, but I'll do 1 or 2 sets. That's it. Just keep that ability.
Yeah, because when you do your AD press, right, you're not rotating the scap all the way up.
Yeah, you're kind of pinned there.
Exactly. So, if you don't use it, you lose it. But I would say, like, to answer your question earlier, just like being a big bench presser, getting into some overhead. Started working on my overhead for strongman because obviously I have to be good at it. And I got up to, there was a good bit of layback, but I did strict press 375.
That's insane.
I think I've done 350 without like heavy layback, no leg drive. So it's like the fact that I'm a huge bench presser definitely gave me a massive head start, but it's not, it wouldn't be, I'm not overhead pressing as much as if I was overhead press training, right?
Yeah.
It's like people want to go to these extremes where they're like, the calisthenics guys always want to say like dips are just better than the bench press. Dips make you a monster bench presser because this one guy did like 200 kilos. And it's like, no, but that guy's a freak athlete who's been working really hard. If he was bench training, he'd be doing 250 kilos, right? Yeah, it's like, he's just strong. And it's like, built this base that he could transition over. And that's kind of how I feel about the bench press. Is like, I got a pretty good overhead press once I started training it because my shoulders, my triceps are strong, but it's not as strong as I would be if I focused on it. But like, pressing is going to have, especially because like I said, I bench a thumb away from the smooth. So it's like a little closer grip, a little bit more emphasis on the triceps and the shoulders always, which is part of why I do it, because I want my presses to carry over to one another because I'm a bit of a general strength enthusiast. But I would say that people want these like really cool, like harsh answers. And it's unfortunate that most of the time I can't give them in good conscience, right? It's like some guys really like to tell you these answers that sound really square and neat and pretty, like 1-to-1 pulling to pushing, or you're going to disintegrate. What about everybody that doesn't do that? Almost no one at the highest level does that. No. Or you need to do this, or like warm up, you're going to disintegrate. What about all the people that don't do that? What about like just warming up with the motion, right? People like these really square answers from an authority figure. It really draws people to listening to them. But it's like, I can't give those answers in good conscience because I've seen so many athletes. I've coached a lot of people by now. I've been doing it for a long time. I've seen so many people respond to different things very well that I can't tell you it's a cut and dry, cool answer. But people who are new, they're like, well, that guy's speaking with authority. That guy's speaking in black and whites, and he's so confident. He couldn't be that confident.
No, it's lack of confidence. That's why he's saying that.
Exactly.
And that's what I love about your channel. You know, you're a real educator because you look at every perspective. You've tried it all, and you work with a multitude of athletes. And the fact that there's so much nuance, like you're 2 steps ahead.
Well, it definitely, like, it hurts the entertainment value of my videos. It's not lost on me. You know what I mean? Like, I always, like, I'm like, damn, I must be the most boring man alive, because I'll go on my YouTube and like, I'm 500 videos deep. I mean, I haven't been around as long as you have, but I've been putting up videos for a lot longer than people realize. You know, and I've got some numbers that, at least in our small space here on YouTube, are pretty big. You know, I got bench 565. I've squatted 730. I've deadlifted 835 over best. So I've got these numbers, and I feel like I'm putting out some decent info. I'm like, damn, my channel's pretty small still. The entertainment value must absolutely suck.
I think it's highly underrated for what you bring.
Well, like, thank you. I've always felt like that, but that's also just my ego speaking. Because I was like, oh, I'm underrated.
No, dude. Every time I click on one of your videos, I learn something new.
Well, thank you, man.
It's well really explained.
And evolution over the years, because it's like when I was getting into lifting, you were already on YouTube, and it's been really cool to see like your evolution as like a lifter and a person, and you like really refine. Like you can see like the stark contrast between like 2016 and now in terms of just like the level of process you're at.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sam. 2016 was an interesting time, that's for sure. But you know, I was young and dumb. I made my mistakes. And,
you gotta get them out of the way early. Better to make them early than late.
The respect is there now, and I've proven that certain things work. So I just needed more time in the gym.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, right? Like, it's like, especially when you're self-taught like I am, right? It's just like there's a lot of trial. Like, you can't speed run trial and error.
No,
you gotta do it long enough to see if things work. You know what I mean? Like, it's a long process. And it's like you said earlier, like lifting is a conduit for self-improvement, right? It's like, it's cool because the same things that make you better at lifting are going to make you better at your job. Eating healthy, drinking your water, going to bed on time, being more conscious of, you know, getting in your steps every day, maintaining a base level of aerobic capacity. All of these things are great for your recovery and great for your lifting. And they also just make you a better person, and they give you more resources on a given day to partake in other like parts of self-improvement, right? Like getting into lifting completely salvaged my girlfriend's academic career, because she was like going to bed late, and she's like, well, I can still do my homework, I can still take tests, but she wasn't doing great. And it wasn't until I was like, well, you can't do those things and be strong. You can't be like going out and drinking and be strong. So she stopped doing it to get stronger, and suddenly like the academics just shot up. It's a great driver. And it's like, wow, the best part about lifting weights is that it's hard and it gets harder. Right? It's like going from my first 185 bench to 225 bench. That felt pretty hard. I trained my ass off. I was chugging protein shakes. I was puking in the parking lot of the YMCA. And then going from 225 to 315. That shit was really hard. I had to work really hard. I stopped having any social life. And then going from 315 to 405, like my life started revolving around it. And then 405 to 500 was even harder. And it's like, it's not when I started my series on my YouTube, because I've got 35 pounds to go, but I know that's gonna be the hardest 35 pounds I've ever added to my bench press, and that's not lost on me. So I know that series is gonna be really long. But that's what I love about lifting, is that it does get harder, and the weights don't lie to you. If you haven't been doing what it takes, like, so it's like, you know, and this scales to different genetics, whether mine is road to 600 or whether yours is road to 315, you have to level up your mind in terms of being a more robust and resilient human, and refine your craft and think about, how can I be getting better? Not just moping about some guy on the internet who has already done it with like terrible technique. You need to think, how can I get better? How can I get better?
Yeah.
You have to become more resilient. These training sessions, they're going to suck sometimes. You're going to have to train under fatigue. You're not going to want to eat your meals sometimes, but it forces you to level up, because it's like the level of caliber of person you needed to be in your mental fortitude to get that 405. Guess what? It's going to have to be even more to get that next increment. And that's awesome, because it's not going to lie to you. You can't pretend you're progressing. You actually have to progress as a person.
You got to learn it. Yeah, you got to. Like going from a 365 bench to 405 was pretty tough. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Smooth but tough.
Yeah.
I feel like getting to 440 is gonna be, I don't know, man. Like that sounds like a nightmare to me, and I know what it's gonna take. Like making the gym my life. Everything's gonna have to be perfect. The sleep, the diet, not one aspect. Like the way that you're organized with tracking like every variable, it's gonna be the same way. And you can't mess up the exercise selection. The volume's got to be ideal. The frequency, like any micro thing is gonna throw it off. And also, what you'll gain from that experience is that maybe what got you to 405 was less effective than what got you to 440. So the methods are always changing. And then you look back in time, it's like, damn, I could have gone even faster progress had I known this earlier. But the thing is, you don't.
Yeah.
So like,
that like if there's no use in beating yourself up.
There's no,
like,
yeah.
Damn. If I knew what I knew now when I was 15 and walking to the gym, I would be a monster by now. But
you would have had your 600-pound bench 2 years ago.
Yeah, and it's like, but like you said, like it's gonna be brutally hard. But that's what makes it like when you get it, there's no greater feeling of like fulfillment. The only way something can feel that good is if it was that difficult to do. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And it's like it wouldn't mean anything if it wasn't that hard. You know?
Yeah, I guess it's like those video games that easily reward you. You don't feel anything, but when it's a real grind, it's like, yeah, I finally beat the boss or the level or whatever.
Yeah, it was exactly. It's like it's the appeal of Dark Souls, right? It's like
exactly.
It feels good because it took you 50 tries. It wouldn't feel that good if you beat it on the first try. It's the same thing, and it's like you said, a big thing you said there that I totally forgot to mention. That is what I think is one of the biggest hallmarks of an advanced lifter. Is you said, man, that 440 bench is going to be tough. I know what I need to do to get there. I think that is the biggest denoter of a really advanced athlete is you understand what it's going to take. You because you have that level of process understanding where you're like, no, I know what I have to do. It's just going to be disgustingly hard.
And like, are you willing to do it? That's the question.
Exactly.
And that's where the top,
Whereas
the
like
limits
a beginner or an
back.
intermediate, they might have all this piss and vinegar to go get after it in the gym. But they're going to try, and they're not sure if what they're doing is the best way to get there, and they're not sure if it's going to work, but they're going to try really hard. I think when you're advanced, it's like you said, you're like, oh, Jesus, I know what it's going to take. I know how to do it, but oh, God, it's going to be hard.
Exactly.
And that's like every advanced lifter I ever talked to says that same thing. They're like, Sam, I want to make that push. I know it's about that time. I'm feeling the itch. Like, I got to get after it again.
You got to have
and
the
it's
itch.
Like, but I know what it's going to take.
Yeah. You got to be mentally ready for it. You know, like, are you willing to gain another 20 pounds of fat and train like a nut job?
Yeah, when that's what this off season, you get treated like a weirdo because you never leave your house other than for groceries. You know, it's just sleeping and stretching and sleeping and stretching and drinking and walking. It was like on repeat. I love it, but goddamn, it sucks sometimes.
And the thing is, Sam, that's where guys start to talk about natural limits. You know, like I benched 405 in 2021, right? A lot of people would say that's the best I could ever do because I haven't really surpassed that since. But that's a choice. Yeah. You know, I want to get strong at other stuff right now because I know that journey is going to be another. It might take the same amount of time, just add half of that. You know,
well, it's like what you said earlier was like that's what the off seasons are for. Is like you have to mentally prepare for because you know what that is. It's not a joke. It's very serious. And it's a lot of work. So it's like the off season lets you put in mental like time to prepare. Like you're building your physiology, you're building it up so that way you've got a bigger base to attack it with. But a lot of it's also kind of that mental reload to get ready. Because if you just jump into it half committed, you're not going to do it. Yeah. You need to be fully committed, And it's like you need to build time. Because if you just say, I'm going to get right into it and you don't really mean it, guess what? You're just going to burn out. It's not going to happen. So it's like taking that time to get that itch back and take that time to like do some training that's just fun as hell in the off season that is going to set you up for more success. That's invaluable.
Yeah, because once you commit to it, there's no going back.
That's how I feel with the 600. I've been like working on it because it's like I said, we're training nuts, we're gym rats. Like you're always working on something because it's just like even if it's just like I'm working on my calves hard as hell. Like you gotta be working on something. It's just we're 10 years into working on muscles. You gotta be working on something or something.
Something's got to go up.
Exactly. And so it's like, but I finally got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm pissed that my bench doesn't start with a 6. I'm ready to do this. I'm going to get fat. I'm going to feel like shit. I'm going to be winded all the time. I'm looking forward to it. I'm doing my first ever cut. I've never cut in my life because I've always been someone who's very difficult for me to put on weight. I started, I was like 145 pounds, same height I am now, 5'10", and I now weigh 260. And I've never done a cut. It's always just been forced. Like I probably puke like 3-4 times a week. It's just hard for me to put on weight. It always has been. Like getting to 180 was hard. It's just been like constant foot on the gas, trying to gain weight. And like I'm not lean anymore, but I'm not like obese yet. And but I've never had to cut because it's like if I slacked for a week, I would drop like 5 pounds. So it's like my body fat's always kind of stayed relatively in check just by the fact that it's like I'll mess up for a week. I had finals. I'm down like 6 pounds back when I was in college. But my plan is to get like proper fat to chase down this 600 because I think I could do 600 weighing 260, but it would take longer. And I want to get this done so then I can focus on my actual sport, which is overhead. So I'm like, okay, well, if I can get from 260 to 275 that road to 600 will be substantially shorter. I believe I can do it either way, but the time span, like it's like you said about earlier, is like if you're willing to get fat, the time span to any given lift definitely goes down. And so that's my plan is I will get a little bit out of shape, just pushing that heavy. And I've always been able to comfortably maintain a good bit over a double body weight bench press. I double body weight bench probably for the first time when I was like 185. And then I got a little bit above that, and I've maintained and improved upon that percentage as I've gotten heavier and heavier. So I know that like usually that tends to stick around. So if I can gain that weight, usually it shows right up in my bench press. So that's my plan. But God, I'm not looking forward to it. But I hit that point, like you said, where it's like, all right, I've been ditzing around for long enough now. It's time to get back into the thick of it.
I like that you're scratching the itch because you want that 600. And the thing is, it's more than ego. It's just you won't be able to sleep at night. Knowing that you have it,
it's knowing that you're capable of something
that you could. That's
and
the problem.
Like, I haven't done it, but I know I can do it.
You know you could. There's zero doubt that you're gonna get there. You just got to do the work.
I truly believe. I'm so deep down the rabbit hole. Like I know what it's gonna take, but I'm willing to do it. Like I'm a bit of a weird dude. Like I don't leave my house ever. I don't really have any friends in real life. Like I've always been a bit of a recluse. Like when I started training when I was like 10 for boxing. Like I just like something about training physically and like honing a craft. I really like the Book of 5 Rings and this idea. Like what a successful life is can vary from person to person. One person might find fulfillment in like having a family and being monetarily successful, but to read the Book of 5 Rings and be like, oh, there's always been weirdos like me that can find their fulfillment in honing a craft as far as it can be honed, like regardless of comparison to other people, just trying to get better at something. And that's where you find your fulfillment in life. Because like as soon as I started boxing, I was just like, something clicked. It was like training my body is what life is to me. Like I would get up. I don't know many 10-year-olds that fucking set an alarm for, sorry for swearing. I set an alarm for like 5 a.m. and just go run before school. And then they get off school and they go to boxing and then they go to track. And it's just like, I just was training. And it was like, I never hung out with friends. I've never been to a party. I've never drank alcohol. Like none of these things. My life is like physical training. That's why I know. I'm like, there aren't many people that are as weird as me. I can bench press 600. I'm willing to do it. I got nothing better to do. And then it's like, once I bench press 600, that's not going to be enough. I need to deadlift 900 or I'm just a bench specialist. That's lame. I don't want to be a bench specialist. And it's like, once I do that, I want to hit a massive back squat. And then I got to start like getting into competitions more. Cause I've always been a bit of a gym rat. Like competition's never been what motivated me. I love training.
Just like the process of training, for sure.
Exactly. Like that self-improvement. It's like people are like, oh, if you don't hit the 600 on the platform, it doesn't count. I don't care if it counts. It counts to me.
Exactly.
I don't care who else thinks it counts. I want to say I bench press 600
That's right.
to myself. I don't care if it's in a competition. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to deadlift 900. I need to start competing more because it's like, what's the point of burying yourself this deep into work and probably taking years off of my life if I'm not going to go do something with it? Because it's like, I would do this if I could never compete. I would absolutely shorten my lifespan and get fat and get heavy and hurt myself and tear muscles because I think it's interesting. I just like, it sounds like people are like, well, I just want to wake up and not feel like shit in the morning. That sounds boring. I want to do this. This sounds interesting. I want to see how strong I can get because I started out as like a 145-pound dude. I was pretty like, like skinny, strong guy, wiry, like not actually like my starting numbers were terrible, but like, the potential was clearly there. I was strong. And it's like, when I started, I like started lifting. I thought I was the coolest guy at the YMCA. No one else was doing what I was doing. And then I got on the internet and I saw like Dan Green. And instead of thinking like, so some people get on the internet and they see that people are way stronger, they get discouraged. Like, I'll never be that. I thought I was good. Apparently I'm bad. And every time they open Instagram, they get depressed. I was so excited. I was like, I didn't know a human being could do that. I wonder if I can do that. I'm going to try.
Inspiration rather than being demotivated. And I think that is a trait of people who naturally are drawn to this lifestyle.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I sometimes I'm like pissed that I'm like, because it's like, I'm not at the point where there are guys who get to my level of strength. My level of strength is pretty up there in about 4 years. I've seen it. And those are like the true, like I'm a genetic outlier, but they're the true genetic outliers. And they speed run what's taken me 10 years of craft. It's like they train hard and they're still drinking on the weekend and out total me. And I'm like, oh God.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to lie.
But
like, never like
they won't have your knowledge though. And they won't be able to coach others the way you're able to.
That's the same thing is like, I've had to dig a little bit deeper than some of my counterparts, right? Are there people that have had to dig even deeper than me? Absolutely. I'm just some guy. I'm no one. I've not done anything. I'm a gym lifter, but I'm pretty deep into this. And like I said, it's not lost to me. I should probably, like, if I get to these lifts, I'm run about, like, I'm down to 900, and I'm putting 500 over my head. I better go compete, or I'm just
with that, 100%.
A little bit of a bitch, pardon my language. Like, what are you scared? Like, if you are that strong, why not? But it's never been a motivator for me. If that wasn't an option, I'd still be doing this stuff because I'm an idiot. Like, I want to do something hard. I want to do something like meaningful, like just living a life of like, where I'm happy all the time and comfortable all the time. That sounds really boring to me. So I'd be doing this whether there was competitions to show it off or not, just because I want to. It sounds interesting.
Yeah. Well, the passion.
I don't expect anything in return. I was talking to Freaky D. I was so happy you had him on here. I love that guy. That guy deserves way more credit. He's a real like OG of lifting YouTube. But I was talking to Freaky D the other day, and I was like, man, I don't expect anything back from this. Like, if I make $1 back, I'll be happy. I don't expect it. I don't expect anyone to like say I'm some amazing guy. I don't expect anything at the end of the rainbow. I expect to probably just die with my health a little bit not so good. But like, it's like I would be doing it regardless. Like, I moved to the middle of nowhere to where there's a lower cost of living, so that way I can focus on my training. I got a vasectomy, so that way I'm not like taking away, like, if I had kids, I feel really bad making this like kind of sacrifice, because like that's not just about you at that point, it's about them. And it's like, I don't want to do that, so I'm not gonna have kids. It's like, but I love it. This is my life, and I'm very happy about it. And it's like, even if if you're like, well, what if you get hurt? That's fine. I'll train my legs. If I hurt my legs, I'll train my arms. If I hurt both of them, I'll train my core. Like, training is my life.
Yeah, but because you love it so much, that does mean that injury prevention takes a higher priority.
Yep. Yeah,
you can't afford time off necessarily.
Yeah, a lot of that's just like and the nice part is that I live in a bubble, right? So it's like
you're able to optimize every factor. Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of injury doesn't happen during the session. It's coming into a big session underprepared, where it's like, I never don't drink my 2 liters of water before I train. I never miss a meal. I never go to bed too late. It's like, that's why I've been like, of course this, you train really hard, you get aches and pains, you get little things, and you're always rehabbing something if you're really trying to push to the limit. But at the same time, it's like, I haven't had anything catastrophic by any means. And I'm sure I will. It's just like, it's
you think so?
By pushing the limits, something will eventually happen. But I think a lot of it is that variable management. Like, because people say, oh, listen to your body, like, do these things during training. But most of my success in avoiding getting overly banged up, and I never like needed surgery for anything like that, never really had to back off my training too far. I've been able to work around stuff. And I think that's just being meticulous with my preparation, which you don't have to be a nut job like me, but the guys watching this can take away from this. Like, there is no reason I can't just drink 2 liters of water before I train. There's no sacrifice there. It's just remembering to do it. Just thinking about the fact that, I have a bench session later. I've got my 8 a.m. I'm just going to drink water during my 8 a.m. That's not a big deal, right? Or like, I'm just going to eat a meal before I walk to the gym. Like, I'm going to do these things to make sure I'm prepared. And if you've got a big session where you feel like, okay, man, this could go wrong, go to bed early. Nothing on Instagram is going to be better than the feeling of killing that session. There's nothing you're going to see that's going to hold more value than that session going good. And nobody actually cares about their time scrolling. They do it mindlessly. Try to be mindful. Just go to bed. It's like these little things anyone can take away. It's like, I don't think anyone should be an idiot like me. Like, I'm dumb.
You got to stop calling yourself an idiot.
Bad ideas, but I think there are things that, like I said, like you said, I wouldn't have the knowledge. I wouldn't be as deep into this, and I wouldn't have like, hey, here's the practical takeaways. Here's something that can be implemented without making your life goofy.
Right. Well, I think because you love this so much, man, you should maybe get a next level camera and film your sessions in the highest quality possible, because it's going to give you the ultimate satisfaction when you get to see yourself benching 600 with a nice blurry background, compressed,
I'm broke as hell, so I've been like that, but that's been something that's on my mind for a while now, is getting like a quality filming setup, because it's like, that was something that really confused me about the YouTube space for a while, because I used to watch YouTube videos. It was all about the information, because how do I get jacked? That's what I want to know. And I wouldn't even notice that the audio was funky, or I wouldn't notice the video was funky. Like, Mike T's videos always used to look like dog ass. They were terrible.
Back then, yeah.
Like, but I'd be like, these are the best videos on YouTube.
Yeah, sure.
Like, but I didn't realize oh my God, a lot of people do care about it from an entertainment perspective. Like those videos Mike T put out with that level of information, if they looked pretty, would be huge. And so it's like when I started posting videos, I didn't care about the audio. I didn't care about the video. I was like, well, I'm showing like I think is a pretty impressive lift, and I'm telling you like some spark notes on what I think can help you get stronger, right? That's good, right? And it's like I didn't realize that people really care about the audio and the video, and so that's something I've realized recently. Is like you said, I want to be able to look back and say, oh, I did a pretty good job with the video too, because I want to be able to see it.
And what's cool is that you also have a great physique, so you get to see that change with time as your strength goes up.
Yeah, you have to remember I'm on the untested side. It's like I don't believe in comparison. Like it's if a guy's natural and I'm stronger than him, it's like I didn't beat him. I compare myself to my peers. And I'm pretty strong compared to a lot of my peers. I am not jacked compared to my peers,
so,
man.
I
don't look that good.
All right. But how about just you compared to your brother? So he's natural. He's gonna stay that way, right?
For at least the foreseeable future. I think eventually his goal is to try to total as much as possible. But I know that he wants to total 1,000 kilograms natty minimum to tie what like Luke Richardson did, who is like a big influence on him. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to ask him.
How far do you think you could have gone? Because
that's a great question.
You hopped on early, wouldn't you say?
Yes, too early. Yeah, that's a great question, right? And it's like I don't like answering it because it's all speculation, right? And it's like, I don't like when you get untested guys that are like, oh, it doesn't actually do anything. It just helps you recover. No, it doesn't. It helps. And it's like, PED usage is a spectrum, right? Some guys go crazy. Some guys keep it more moderate. For whatever it's worth, I've kept it moderate until now because I've been able to linearly progress. So a bunch of people would tell me I'm lying, and that's fine. I don't really care. But I got to a 420-pound bench press natty.
Nice.
At about 200 pounds. And I believe I could have taken that a lot further. My technique was subpar. I wasn't at the right weight class yet. I believe I could have taken that a lot further. I think I'm naturally better at benching than Max is. Max is quite a bit bigger than me. He weighs about 330. I weigh about 260. So he's 70 pounds heavier than me. I think I could. Max has benched 475 natty. I think I could have. I just think I've got a better propensity towards it than Max. And I was so far from refining my process back then. Like that one, wow, that could have been taken a lot further, and I know it. Like whether people want to bully me about saying I'm lying or something, that's fine. I don't really care. I believe I squatted 600. Again, I wasn't filled out, right? I was only like 210 by that point. And it's like I could have filled out my frame. My technique was like, I feel like I didn't really even get that. I didn't scratch the surface, right? And as I think I pulled 675, something around those. I don't know exactly. I didn't write it in my calendar. But I really believe I could have taken those so much further because like Max and I we started like, and it was pretty clear that it was like going to be good trajectory, right? Like, and it's like, I don't know. I think a lot of it was just the fact that I viewed it as inevitable because I always knew my goal was to lift as much as possible. I have all the respect in the world. Yeah. I respect the hell out of natural lifters. If anything, it's smarter. You shouldn't be compromising your lifespan for a hobby. It's stupid. It's dumb. I have all the respect in the world for people saying, well, my goal is to get as jacked as I can as a natural. And that way I'm not like, if anything, I'm healthy, right? Because natural bodybuilding, other than the part where you get really, really lean and step on stage, is quite helpful. Like the things that you need to do to get your body to put on muscle are a lot of the same things you need to do to stay healthy and live a long time. Right. So it's like, I think natural bodybuilding is super cool because of its kind of inherent overlap with health. That untested bodybuilding is the exact opposite. It's inherently completely averse to health. You're still trying to maintain it, but it's like, it's totally a different relationship. And I totally get wanting to be as strong as you can naturally. But I guess it was a lot of it was just like, and I get this is why that people don't want guys who glorify PEDs on YouTube. It's just all the guys back then that I looked up to were on PEDs. So I was like, well, I guess I'll get it on PEDs eventually. And I pulled the trigger way too early for no good reason. But because everybody, I was like, Dan Green, Stan Efferding, all these guys are untested powerlifters, and those were my role models. It was just kind of an inevitability for me, right? And it's like, looking back, I should have pushed it back, right? Because it's like, I would do it because my goal is to lift as much weight as I can. And that's my goal. It's stupid. And I would never, ever, ever, ever encourage a young person to follow what I'm doing. But it's like, I would have pushed it back because it's like, it's because people are like, well, if I'm going to get on eventually, why am I going to get on right now? Because your process sucks and it's going to mask the process sucking. And then you're just going to do more and more and more to progress rather than fix your process. Whereas to get strong natty, you gotta actually understand what's going on.
There's no choice.
And you've got to refine your process. You got to get your technique good. You got to get everything good. And then when you add in PEDs to that environment, you get way better results than like if you go on Reddit on like the r/steroids, like the results are terrible because guys are getting on without having
any a bunch of novices.
And it's like you're compromising your health the same amount then or later, and you can get way more results later if your level of process is higher, and you don't need to use it as a crutch. And it's just like, it was a mistake on my part, right? Like,
wow.
I'm an idiot.
Well, dude, I appreciate the honesty in you saying that, and I think that actually will discourage people from hopping on.
I hope, but
at the same time,
I'm jealous of Max because it's like I've been able to guide Max to do things smarter than I've done. Right, Max is a great athlete. He's got a great athlete's IQ. He's a very he doesn't let on, but he's a very intelligent guy, and he's got a very good feeling because he's been a competitive powerlifter for 10 years, and he knows what he needs to do to get ready for the next meet, what he needs to do to get ready for the next session. He knows all this stuff. But I've been able to guide him, and I'm like, no, there's no reason. You're getting better, like at a great rate, and we have so many things to improve upon. And it's like, also, to talk about what you were talking about earlier with like some people saying they don't think you could bench 440 and 405 is your career peak, is like that's just outside looking in. They've got no information. You have all the information. And to me, right, like I understand exactly why you say I think I could do 440 is because you know there's things you could do better than what you were doing when you did the 405. It's arrogant to say, no, I've reached my limit. No. There's nothing you could do better. Are you kidding? Like there's not a thing. You're delusional. Like, some of the people that are like, no, I've reached my limit. It's like, dude, you don't even eat 4 square meals a day. You go to bed at 2 a.m. What the hell do you mean? You're going to look me in the eye and tell me you could not do anything better. Nothing. Exactly. There are things I'm deep into this. I look at myself in the mirror and I know there's things I could do better. I know I could always get better. That's a fact. I've never worked as hard as a human could work. Nowhere close. If I fail one of my goals, it doesn't come to me as like, maybe I've reached my limit. Maybe that's not possible for me. I know I could try harder. To say that I'm trying as hard as a person could try is crazy. But yeah, no, like I'm jealous of Max. Like Max has done it right. I've done it wrong, right? Like I'm the big brother. I'm leading the way, and I'm making all the mistakes with the form, with the training, with my health.
It's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, I'm making mistakes for him. But it's like, if he does choose to go that route, he's gonna
blow you out of the water.
Exactly. He's going to blow me out of the water because he's doing everything so well beforehand. His health is pristine. He's the healthiest 330-pound man to ever live. Like he can run, jump. He's fast as hell. Like his blood work looks great. Like he doesn't need a CPAP to sleep at 3:30. Like Max is a freak. I love Max to death. Max is like my pride and joy that like me going so deep into this has like inspired Max to do it, and I've been able to guide him to a precision of his career so far. Like almost every meet, Max goes 9 for 9 because he prepares, and I can be the objective set of eyes to help him prepare. But like, yeah, Max is my pride and joy as a coach and as a brother. But I'm gonna keep up. I'll do whatever I need to. I'll use straps. I'll use plates. I'll use
anything.
I'm not gonna be that's a big motivator for me. Is I don't need to be stronger than Max. If Max ties me,
he's his own man.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be the weaker brother. I don't want to be known as the weaker brother. So I'm willing to go to the ends of the earth to prevent that one.
That's awesome. Big respect to Max. Big respect to you. And I love what you said. Like, they really didn't try everything. Like, you were talking earlier about adding 5 pounds a training cycle, which is every 10 weeks or so.
Yep.
That's a lot, if you ask me.
That's a great.
But people don't see that, which blows my mind. So you're doing that with advanced guys.
Yeah. When I fall short nowadays, a lot of the time, maybe it's every other, right? Because as I've gotten more advanced, even 5 a training cycle, like you said, that's a damn good rate of progression. So it's like nowadays, I might look, as long as I can secure a 5-pound PR on my deadlift every other training cycle, right? But it's like, that's how my progress has always come, is in repeated bouts of like just kind of keeping my foot on the gas. Whereas some other athletes, it's more off season, go crazy hard for a bit. Then they get a 30-pound PR. Then they send a long off season, then repeat. And that's how their progression has gone. And that's been their process for getting stronger. And it's worked. And I have to assume it's very productive. But for Max and I, it's more been about what's the sustain, like as you get tougher and more resilient as a person, what is the level of effort that you can sustain without burning out, and just puts that gas pedal down, push it down, and just five over years and years and years. And like, obviously some blocks we come up short. Max doesn't hit a 5-pound PR this block. I break out the whiteboard and I write him up a new plan for the next training cycle. But that's how it is.
I would say for advanced lifters, 5 pounds is the minimum. For elites, I can see more so every other time potentially. Yep. But like, even if you're talking the minimum, that's like 25 pounds a year.
Exactly, so and that's great.
It is great. Right? It sounds like because the absolute load is so high, it's a lot. People don't get that because they're used to getting that on a monthly basis as novices. But once you've been at this for so long, like, please sign me up for that program, man. I want 25 pounds to my bench.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It's exactly right. Like, it sounds bad, but it's really good. Like 25 pounds a year later on. Like you said, I think you're bang on with those numbers. Like an advanced athlete, if they're 5 pounding every 10 weeks, they are doing their job. They're doing damn good. And it's the same thing with like an elite athlete. If you're getting 5 pounds every other training cycle, you're doing damn good. I like those. And like intermediate, like 10, 15. And it's a beginner, you might just be running linear still if you're a beginner. And that's fine. You're adding the 5 pounds every week or every other week, right? And it's like, but if you get into a 10-week block structure, as a newer lifter, you might be looking at like 30 to 40 every
easily
10 weeks. Right?
Absolutely.
But it's like, I like those numbers.
Awesome. I want to start wrapping up in a bit. Do you have any final messages you'd like to give to my audience for anyone who's maybe struggling or doesn't have the right mindset to do this long term? We talked about so much, but like, what's one just general thing you can say that would be helpful?
Try to just live in your own little world. Like it's a fulfilling life. I can look back at the times where I was just like, I just was getting through my classes because I wanted to go to the gym, and I was thinking all day about like my bench press, and it didn't bother me that my bench press was only 165 pounds. Like that didn't bother me at all. I was excited because I was like, next week if I do really good, I could do 170. That sounds sick. And I wasn't comparing myself to other people. It's if you can just stay in your own little world of loving your training in a way that you love and you look forward to it every day, picking exercises that you enjoy, as well as some that challenge you that maybe you don't enjoy as much, but a mixture. And if you can just be obsessed with your own little process, it's a very fulfilling life if you view it that way. And you're not comparing yourself to other people at the gym or other people on Instagram. And you'll notice that if you look down and you're just like, I could probably do a little bit better with my food. Like maybe I'm not going to eat like a meticulous vertical diet 6 meals a day. Maybe it's not going from like bad to a perfect diet. I'm just going to add in a protein shake after I train and just like eat whatever mom makes when I get home. Right? It's not, you don't have to go straight from beginner to elite. You just need to find little ways to get better. Like I'm a skinny guy. I'm going to eat I'm just going to eat a bar during my break at school. Just like little ways you can find to leverage to get yourself better. And if you just keep doing that day after day, I'm going to go to bed a little earlier. Oh, I'm going to make sure I get my steps in. If I'm working an office job, I'm going to make sure I go for a walk after I eat my lunch. If you can find all these little ways and you can find fulfillment and be proud of yourself for those little improvement and optimizations you make, suddenly you're going to look up from your notebook and you're going to be passing a lot of people that are busy looking around. Right. So it's like, don't worry about that. Really enjoy your own process and finding little ways to meet yourself where you're at. You don't have to dive deep into things, training like 7 days a week. You don't have to do any of this. Find ways to get a little bit better week after week after week after week. And the result will continue to snowball.
Sam, that was beautiful.
Well, thanks.
So, hey, thank you so much for being here today with me. What a chat. So much gems. I think out of all the podcasts I've done, this is one of the most informative. Like, I'm even learning while I'm talking to you. So it was amazing. Hopefully have you again sometime. Keep up the great work with the channel. You're so passionate. Everyone could see it. If people want to learn more about you, man, where can they do so?
So I've got my YouTube channel. I'm trying to get back to posting every day. Just putting out videos often, not for any reason other than that's just like, that's the best way to keep myself accountable for staying on top of it. Because if I spend a week, it'll be 2 weeks. I just kind of like getting in a flow state, just like, hey, here's my training from today, or hey, here's a single topic that I was thinking about that you guys can think about. Hey, here's a little tip with your nutrition, that kind of thing. I do post on my YouTube really often if that's something that interests you guys. And then I have an Instagram that's just my last name, which is Shether, Shetthar. I'm not as active on there because I don't like the environment of Instagram as a platform as much as YouTube. But if you guys are interested, you can scroll back on my Instagram. There's like 2,000 posts on there, which is 2,000 individual training sessions.
All the PRs.
Yeah, you can see like a bunch of PRs at the time. If you're interested in seeing some old videos, like when I was lifting in high school, I do have it. A lot of it's cataloged on there. But I don't post on it that much right now because I'm really digging YouTube as a platform a little bit more. Because when I was getting into it, powerlifters like, you got your lifting Instagram, and I would always put it on there. And then once my following got big, it got stressful. It's like I don't really want people to see my like mundane volume training and like judge me for the fact that I'm not benching something impressive. Like I don't like posting the mundane stuff on there because I can't contextualize it. And I think there's a lot of like toxic group chats on Instagram where stuff gets sent. I don't know. I don't like Instagram that much. So I don't use that very much. So the YouTube is the primary place where I am at.
That's where you're going to get all the knowledge and wisdom. Check out Sam's channel and Instagram, even though he's not as much of a fan. Links in the description box. And we'll see you next time.